Good afternoon. We will begin our first virtual GMDA annual conference and board meeting. Welcome, everyone. We will have the roll call. Kristen?
Would you like me to just read off board members in attendance? Is that what I'm?
Why don't you do each state
Okay,
first, and then people can answer after that.
from California, I've got John Woodling and James Chaffee. Is that correct, James? Did I?
Yes, it is. Yeah, present.
Okay. Or is there anyone else from California in attendance? Okay, we'll move on to Colorado. Is Everett Kistler here? What about Jim Reasoner? Don Rosenbrock? Oh, Billy, I see you.
Yeah, Kristen, we have Don Rosenbach, Randy Ray, myself, and Everett Kistler.
Oh, okay, great. So Jim's the only one that's not with you guys today?
That's correct.
Okay. Kansas, we had Jason and Mark, and I think I saw Oren. Okay.
Tim.
And Tim. Okay, Tim's here as well.
Tim's here.
Is there anyone from Louisiana? Tony, are you with us?
I'm Gary Beard. I'm here.
Gary's here.
I'm here, but I'm not representing Louisiana. I'm just an individual.
Okay. From Mississippi, I saw we had Don Christie and Daniel Shannon. I see Benjamin Griffith is here. Is there anyone else from Mississippi? Is that it? Okay. Nebraska, we have Linda Luby, Dick Ehrman, Tyler Napperstick. What about Lyndon Vogt? Is he here?
No, he is not, but this is Courtney Wood from Central Platte.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. New Mexico, Aaron Baylock, AJ Olson, is he with us? You're muted. I can't hear you.
How about now?
Yeah, there we go. What'd you say?
If AJ isn't on, he plans on joining us.
Okay.
So he should be here.
What about Greg Alpers?
He is not going to be able to join us today.
Okay. From Texas, we have Steve Walthauer, Gene Bourne, C.E. Williams, and is Robert Bradley with us?
Yes.
Here.
Okay, great. That's who I have for those states. Is there anyone from Idaho, North Dakota, or Washington?
You're on.
Okay.
Kristen,
Yes.
this is Mark Rood. I wasn't sure if you were just calling board members or others, because there's a couple others from Kansas.
Okay. Who else do you have from Kansas?
We have Shannon Keaton and Clay Scott.
Keaton, Keeton.
It's Kenyon, Kenyon.
Kenyon. Okay. And Scott, what's the first name of Mr. Scott?
Clay Scott.
And Kristen, we have several other people from Nebraska as well. I don't know if they just want to sound off, or I can tell you whichever.
I think maybe if since we know who in the board is here, if maybe if a representative from each state could maybe just send me an email with the other participants, just in lieu of time.
That'll work.
Okay, I think now we will consider the approval of the January 2020 conference minutes. You should have a copy there.
Kristen, what are the other set of minutes that was placed in the packet?
July 20th,
Yes.
July 2020, Steve.
Okay, thank you.
They're on page 9.
Thanks.
Are we going to consider these together or do you want them separate?
Separate.
Okay, I'd make the motion, we approve the January 12th, 2020.
Do I have a second?
This is Tim Bays. I'll second it.
Roll call. It's been moved and seconded to approve the January 2020 conference minutes. Any discussion? Roll call.
I would recommend anyone who disagrees with it to say nay. If that's okay with you, Madam President.
Yes, it is.
Madam President, I don't hear anyone
I don't either.
objecting.
Okay, so we will move on to the July 2020 virtual meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to accept those?
I'd move that. Dick Ehrman.
I'd second this, Jason Norquist.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to accept the virtual July 2020 meeting minutes. Any discussion? Roll call will be the same. If there's any disagreement with anything, nay. Not hearing any, those minutes are approved. Want to go on with the presentations? And Aaron, do you want to lead that or introduce those people yourself and or why don't you do that, Mark? Would that be all right?
Jason.
Or Jason?
I was pointing to Jason to unmute me, but I was already unmuted.
Oh.
Thank you, Madam President. We've talked a little bit internally amongst several of us about learning a little bit more on something water related that had to do with the COVID-19 crisis that we all are living through. And Dr. Belinda Sturm with KU Engineering Department, I met her and she's on the line and asked her to make a brief presentation on what she's involved with in the state of Kansas, which I think is indicative to activities all across the US related to something that's over my head. I'm too deep of water, so I'm just going to let Belinda talk about it. Dr. Sturm, it's your presentation.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation today. I have a few slides, but I don't intend for this to be an overly formal presentation. I mostly want to introduce some of the efforts that are being made in the public health and engineering community to track COVID in our public water supplies, and just open myself up for questions. I think this has been a lot in the news. I've seen it on a lot of evening news. I've been interviewed myself by news agencies. So really, I'll make myself available to sort of answer questions. I will show a few slides, just I think some visuals will help. Let me get this machine going here. And if someone can tell me that it's coming through.
It's coming through.
Great. So my name's Belinda Sturm. I'm a professor at the University of Kansas, and Justin Hutchison is working with me on this project. He's also a professor here. I specialize in wastewater treatment. So a little bit out of the groundwater space. In that area, I really focus a lot on the biology of wastewater treatment, how to make the bacteria do the work of cleaning up the water. So I have a lot of experience with biological methods. I am not, before the last 9 months, specializing in tracking viruses in water, but it's, in my toolbox of things that I can look for if I know what I'm looking for. So just to kind of start, I'll say that the area that's being leveraged here in the public health space is the idea that in communities we have wastewater collections infrastructure. And this is a snapshot of the master plan from Lawrence, Kansas. Every community will have one of these, but we're thinking very much about, every toilet is connected to the sewer system. And you have a series of pump stations, and you have the influent wastewater treatment plant, or in a lot of the communities I'm working for, lagoon systems that are basically collecting stool samples from any toilet connected to that system. So as we're trying to track COVID, there's a lot of testing campaigns where we try to get individuals to come into an office and to be individually tested. But really what this is trying to think about is, okay, well, all of these people are depositing human specimens into the sewer system. Can we leverage that infrastructure to understand how many people in that community are sick? All right, so this is really thinking about pooled sampling. This is being termed wastewater-based epidemiology. It's not a new term. It just hasn't been widely looked at for monitoring public health. So in the past, what wastewater has been looking at, it's been used to track illicit drug use in the same fashion. Like, you want to understand how prevalent drug use is, you can look for how much of that drug is in the wastewater. That's not as common in the United States. It's been proven to be useful in certain arenas. It has been used to look for the disease outbreaks of enteric viruses. So these are viruses we expect to cause diarrhea, and we expect to find them in human wastewater. Norovirus, hepatitis A, poliovirus. When the Ebola concern came out about 4 or 5 years ago, there was really an awakening of this, because the concern was that if we had active Ebola patients in the United States and they shed that virus in wastewater, would that virus in wastewater be infective? And mostly we were concerned about all of our workers who work in public works, right? So the operators of the wastewater treatment plant, plumbers, folks who may have to come in contact with raw sewage. So the community started to look at virus detection a little bit more. And so we were prepared for SARS-CoV-2 to say, okay, can we look for this? I want to say, because one of the big questions I get, well, can you get COVID from wastewater? And our current understanding is that you cannot. All right, so we're not looking for infectious viruses. That was one of the first questions that needed to be answered right away, because we have a lot of people who work in the wastewater industry, and we wanted to make sure that they're not, that's not an additional concern for transmission. That said, when people ask me, is wastewater safe? The answer is no, raw wastewater is not safe. Raw sewage is not safe to be around, to sort of go into your mouth or any of those routes of transmission. But we don't understand that this respiratory virus can be transmitted through wastewater, but we do think we can find evidence that it's infected people. All right, so these are just some news things that you may have seen some news similar. Some universities have used this on dormitories to understand how much of their student population has been sick. The Center for Disease Control, and this was sort of put up in August of last year, they've started something called the National Wastewater Surveillance System. This is really in its infancy, and I don't know where this is going to go post-pandemic. But I think the federal agencies have really understood the manpower and the expertise in the wastewater field and the water field to track viruses and populations. So, you know, I'll sort of step back and go just a bit into the science. SARS-CoV-2 is a respiratory virus. It's not an enteric virus, but in human samples, it has been shown to be shed in stool. So this is some data that came out of a hospital study in Munich, Germany. It came out in March, almost a year ago now. So just when the novel coronavirus was being first studied. And what it showed is sputum, which is the mucus that you cough up. The concentrations in sputum were similar and decayed about the same rate as they did in stool samples. So this enabled us to look in wastewater for evidence of human infection. The other thing that this study pointed out to us is that people would shed the virus for up to 3 weeks after they were infected. So that is important because it means that if we take a wastewater sample and we observe the virus in that wastewater, it doesn't mean that someone is just in the most infected phase. It means that they have been infected within the last 2 weeks to a month, and that we are still seeing them shed the virus. So, where this is at in our water system, you can take a wastewater sample anywhere along collection, and it's going to tell you something about the people who are connected to that sewer collection system upstream. So the term that's gotten touted about is called a sewer shed, right? So the same concept of a watershed, but we're really thinking about the sewer collection point. That could be the outlet of a dorm or the outlet of a building, or it could be a manhole that's connected just downstream of a nursing care facility. A lot of the work we've done is at the influent of a wastewater treatment plant. So everybody in the sort of community that's attached to the influent. I think it's also important to emphasize that we're not looking at the effluent. We're not looking at what goes into the river, the discharge. So the concern is not for us to be worried about infective COVID-19 in our water supplies, because there's no evidence that this can be infection can be transmitted through water. It's a respiratory illness, but we're looking at the influent of the plant basically as a pooled sample for the community. So there have been quite a few studies in this area that have been published in the last 6 months. This is one that got a lot of press early on. This came out of New Haven, Connecticut. The black line is the number of COVID-19 cases that were reported in their public health. And the red line is the virus concentration in the wastewater. And what they showed is that they had nearly a perfect correlation of concentration of the virus in wastewater and COVID-19 case data, but more importantly, that they had a 1-week lead time. So the idea is that you could detect the virus in wastewater up to a week before people were symptomatic and were asking to be tested. So that gave a lot of hope for public health, so that we would have a little bit of lead time. A lot can happen in a week. You can tell your community that there is active virus in the community, that you need to take precautions, whatever those interventions may be, if there'll be mask or distancing or school closures. But the idea of having a 1 week lead time, and that you could understand that before people were actively seeking medical help, really, really got a lot of communities and states asking, can we test our water supply? Right. And then I'll pause after this slide and see if there are any questions at this point. I want to say that there's a lot of potential for these methods. And this is a slide that came off of the Water Research Foundation, which is a professional organization that gathers wastewater professionals. And it sort of went through what are some possible uses for looking for virus in water supplies, and then where are we at currently with our current understanding and feasibility of these. So I'll kind of go through each of these, and I'll speak to where the state of this is in most of our communities. So the first is to look at the wastewater concentrations and understand trends. You know, is the concentration increasing? Is the concentration decreasing? Are we on the right path? You can imagine now that vaccines are being distributed, that we may look at this and we may say, okay, are we really, you know, vaccinations are going up, or maybe there's some pockets of communities that aren't being vaccinated either for availability or choice. Are we really decreasing the prevalence of SARS-CoV-2 in our community? That's feasible right now. So, you know, we feel good about detecting the increases. You'll notice that detecting the decreases, our community gave just sort of a half-hearted feasibility, because again, people shed the virus for up to 3 weeks. So even if infections are going down, it's going to be a little bit of a lag time before we see those decreases in the wastewater, right? So people could be over their infectivity phase, where they're not actively transmitting infectious virus, but they could be still getting it out of their system, right, in the stool. And so detecting increases is very feasible. Detecting decreases is feasible, but there's going to be that understanding of a lag time that it's not going to be as the immediate gratification that the increases we'll see. The second use is obviously, okay, well, if we can detect the concentration in the wastewater, can we back calculate how many people are sick, right? So can we determine prevalence? And that is theoretically possible. And we don't nearly have enough data for us to give that number with confidence. So I can write out the calculation of how I would do that, how I would go from concentration to number of infected people. And if I put error bars around that, you lose your, I think, your public health meaning of it, because there's a lot of uncertainty. Most of that uncertainty is because people shed the virus at very different rates. And at different rates after they've immediately been sick, when they're very sick, versus 3 weeks later when they're getting better. So the shed rate of how many viruses you shed in wastewater has a lot of uncertainty to it, and that leads to a lot of uncertainty in our calculation of community prevalence. The risk assessment, again, from the wastewater community, you know, we really want to keep our workers' safety. Safety is always first. Really trying to use this to understand the risk to utility workers. That's getting better, you know, as we gain more knowledge, but I would still say that that's a little bit it's a little bit difficult right now. And I can go into why it's difficult. viral evolution. So just within the last 2 weeks, this mutation in the virus that has been observed in the United Kingdom and now has been observed in several states in the United States. When we look for the virus, we've been looking at the specific CDC primers. But if we wanted to sequence the entire viral, we can look for viral evolution. I'll tell you that I'm not currently doing that. That costs quite a bit more money to do sequencing and to do that. But certainly nationally, we go through the trouble of getting these samples, of collecting the virus. And people like me, like in my freezer, I have probably 1,000 viral samples from all across the state of Kansas for the last year. So, if we ever wanted to, we could crack open my freezer and look for those mutations. I'm just not looking for them right now. So I want to pause for a moment and ask if there are any questions about this, and then I could show you some of our efforts in Kansas here, but that's sort of an overview of what we're doing with wastewater-based epidemiology. And I'll kind of open up the chat and see if there are just some, I don't know you, I don't know this group. I don't know if you're shy or if you just shout out questions. So you could give me any impression of yourself right now and I'd believe you.
Belinda, this is Jim Chiaffi in California. Could you repeat your thoughts about the risk assessment to the utility workers? And,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the reason why this is hard with this method is when we look for the virus, what we are detecting is the RNA. We're detecting the genetic material. And that says nothing about whether it's infective or not. So strictly speaking, with the methods we currently do, I can only tell you that the virus was there, but I can't tell you if it's possible to make you sick, right? I always say it's kind of like when you watch CSI, like you can detect the DNA and at some point it was there, but you don't know if it was alive when it was there. So strictly speaking, with the methods today, we cannot say that it's not infective. We're going to have to do some more steps to do that. So that's why this wasn't given 2 pluses. If we develop some additional lab work, we might be able to get there, but currently we can't.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for asking a question. Anything else before I'll show you some data. I always like to see data, but this is sort of some numbers.
Belinda?
Mm-hmm.
We had a question about, what's the opportunity for COVID, the virus to spread to groundwater?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say that I'm not concerned about this at all today. I think no one has found when we collect a virus from wastewater, no one has found that virus to be infective. So we may find SARS-CoV-2 RNA in groundwater, that I believe. Like I think especially in an alluvial system or a well-connected surface water groundwater system, we may find, or a septic system, we would find SARS-CoV-2 virus or RNA in the groundwater, but I would not be concerned with it being able to give the disease COVID-19. That's not true for other viruses, right? So for enteric viruses, for waterborne pathogens that can survive in wastewater, that would not be true. But for COVID, because it's a respiratory virus and there's no evidence that it survives in a water system, I'm not concerned.
How long does the RNA last in water?
That shouldn't be such a difficult question, but I think, so I put RNA in the freezer and it will last for years and years. So depending on the temperature and, you know, how many solids and things, it could be detected for a long time. But because I want to measure, like samples that get shipped to me, I try to analyze within 24 hours because it starts to decay. But I wouldn't say it goes away, especially in a cold groundwater system. It could stay around for a while.
So potentially it could be used for a tracer.
It wouldn't be the tracer I would use because it does decay. So, you know, I like chemical tracers better for sure. But yeah, I think in terms of, you know, it's much more common for us to look at E. coli or norovirus or adenovirus or some of the enteric viruses. Those have been used to show evidence of septic contamination of groundwater, certainly.
Linda, this is Gary Beard in Louisiana. Have any of your tests looked at the reduction or possible reduction of the virus through the treatment process itself? In other words, it measured it effluent prior to disinfection. I'm sure disinfection, especially with chlorination, takes care of most of that. But.
Yeah. So I initially did a few samples of effluent and they were all non-detect. And so as they should be. So I haven't repeated.
That was prior to disinfection or post disinfection?
Post disinfection, they were all non-detect.
Okay. Did you take any prior to disinfection?
All of my samples are, so let me go back because if you're not familiar with the treatment train. So all of my samples are on the raw influent. I haven't taken any intermediate along the treatment train. I've done influent and then I've done after disinfection, but I haven't looked at like sedimentation or any of that.
No, yeah, I knew that post disinfection, you probably had 100% kill, whether it was UV or chlorination, but I was just curious, did you take any samples prior to disinfection past all bioprocesses to see if there was any reduction?
Yeah, I didn't, you know, you're asking me these questions, so I know you know the answer to this, but I'll repeat. You know, the American Water Works Association has put out a statement because obviously everyone is concerned about this. When we meet our disinfection standards in drinking water, it's much harder to disinfect bacteria than it is viruses. So the assumption and all evidence to date is that if we meet our disinfection for bacteria, we take care of viruses. And SARS-CoV-2 does not seem to be unique in that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Belinda, this is Orrin Farrell, Kansas. And forgive me if this is a simple question or ignorant question. With the rise in vaccinations going through, would those be shed in the stool as well that would then give potential false positives? You know, if you're looking at the wastewater as a tracer or a marker for infection rates.
Yeah, no, it's not a simple question. It's one that we've all asked because, you know, obviously vaccines were developed to take care of the disease, and we've all gotten the information in the wastewater community. Current understanding is that it will not be shed in the stool, that it will create antibodies, and the gene that I'm specifically looking at, if you don't mind, I'll go. I didn't want to go into too much, but these are different pictures of different viruses. And the coronavirus, which we've all kind of gotten used to looking at, it has these spikes off of it. So I'm detecting that spike protein, the RNA that makes that protein, and the vaccine doesn't do that. So I shouldn't be detecting. Now, that said, I am in one of my communities, we're looking at manholes south of nursing homes. And over the next month, I expect all of those residents to be vaccinated. And I will know with data in the next month that that is true. And I'm looking forward to having that data.
Thank you.
Mhm. So I put these pictures up here. I wanted to tell you all that I think Mark, when he spoke to me, asked me a really great question. He was like, well, do you think we'll continue? I can't remember the exact question, but what lasting impact will this have maybe for our field? And we all hope that COVID-19 goes away and we say goodbye to it and we're good riddance, and that we don't have another pandemic like this for the next 100 years, right? If this is going to be a 100-year event. But what I think the lasting effect has been is that our field, all the engineering community is really mobilized to respond to a public health threat. And I think the fact that we're all using our biology, our DNA tools, that we'll be ready to maybe look at enteric virus contamination and track that. Not all viruses are the same. So that's the point of this slide. So they have lots of different shapes. They have lots of different sizes. They're actually incredibly diverse when it comes to their genetic code. Some of them have DNA, some of them have RNA, some of them have envelopes, some of them don't. So, someone like me, an academic, could make a career studying these things. I look forward to going back to wastewater treatment at some point. But we are looking at the genetic code, and everything has a genetic code. So moving forward, I think anything we're interested in looking for, that will have many more people who have the tools to look for that. So, if it's E. coli, if it's norovirus, if it's Giardia, anything that we want to know if it's there, there will be many more labs that can look for that and answer that question. So I'll end with some data. Do we have time for me to show you one more slide of data?
Sure.
Okay, so this is Johnson County, which is the most populous county in Kansas. And we've been partnering with Johnson County Wastewater, the public utility. They have 6 treatment plants. They're in the diamonds. And the blue outlines are their sewer shed for each of those treatment plants. And then this is Lawrence. Lawrence is much smaller. We have 2 treatment plants, and those are the sewer sheds for each of those treatment plants. So we've now been doing weekly sampling of these plants since June. And we have created partnerships with our county public health offices to send them the data every week. And they use it as one of the things that they consider as they think about how to manage the public health crisis. So we have a public dashboard for this in Lawrence. And you could stare at this data for a long time and maybe have some fun or go crazy. But this overlays, the green line is the case data, and we've been up and down in Lawrence. And then the dots are the wastewater concentration. And so, we're kind of digging into this data, but I wanted to show you the correlation matrix here. And let's just look at the first line of the correlation matrix. But this shows you the wastewater concentration and how this correlates to the case data. And you can get a sense that it does correlate, and that it correlates best when we look at like a 21-day rolling average of the case data. So, I've used this to talk to our public health, and really, like, we are now upticking after Christmas. Our concentrations are going up, and we feel confident unfortunately, that means our case numbers are going to start going up. And we're just kind of using that data to really be thoughtful and communicate within our local paper to folks, especially as students come back and we think about what that will do to our community. Across campus, I've worked across Kansas. I've worked with Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and we've sampled at small treatment plants and small lagoon systems across the state. And this doesn't show you the concentration data, but red is the most concentrated. Some of the highest concentrations we observed are in our smallest systems. And some of that has to do with there not being a dilution effect, right? There's not, and some of it has to do with there are pockets of high case numbers that we've observed in these small communities. So that's what I had prepared today. And again, if you have any questions, I'll answer them or I'll be quiet.
I
I have a
Hey,
question.
Belinda. Oh, sorry.
I was wondering if any of your colleagues have determined that there's something unique about this virus in how it seems to affect so many different people at different ages and different health, so differently. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of consistency as far as, yeah, you're going to get sick or no, you're not.
Yeah, I am. I don't. I usually joke, I know a lot about biology, but I know very little about humans. I'm out of my wheelhouse when we talk about human medicine there. So I have the same question. I'll tell you, I live in a household of 6. We have 3 generations in my home. I have 3 boys and my father lives with me. And I think about that daily because I think my boys will be okay and I think my dad would not. So that is a frustrating thing about this virus.
Hey, Belinda, this is Dick Urban from Nebraska. Boy, really great stuff. And I apologize. I've been furiously taking notes here. So if you already answered this question, I apologize in advance. But lately we hear a lot about these new mutations, the British mutations, South Africa, all that sort of stuff. Is there any work going on to try and distinguish those mutations through wastewater? Would that be helpful? Is that planned? What's going on there?
Mm-hmm. So there is no reason that we can't use our samples to detect those mutations. I think it comes down to a case of funding. So the methods I'm doing right now are relatively cheap. I understand for the people paying for them that it costs them money and it's real money, but they're relatively cheap. But when we go to sequencing, the price tag jumps exponentially. This is where federal funding is really needed. A lot of my sampling efforts have been locally funded by Kansas and by the utilities. And I think some of them benefited from CARES money to fund that, but sequencing, that's going to take a deeper pocket. Now that said, the mutation from the United Kingdom, that sequence has been published and I've already ordered the primer. So I do intend to look for that mutation in some of my past samples. I'm just gonna do that out of curiosity.
Well, one of the things I might chime in and say is certainly after this information and meeting Belinda and the common experiences that we all have had through COVID and COVID conversations, I can't help but think through the funding that we keep talking about regarding water and water quality, and to what extent some of our discussions on the Hill and with NWRA and others might want to think in terms of advocating and underwriting for additional funding for the work like Belinda's involved with. So I can't help but think in those terms, and I just throw that out there as we look ahead. And I certainly thank you, Belinda, for all the information, taking some time today. Wow, the work that you're doing is phenomenal, extremely interesting, and I just wish you the best in all of that endeavor.
Yeah, well, it's one of the projects that you hope that you have to end soon. So I'd love it. I'd love it if the problem went away. All right. Well, thank you I hope I didn't take up too much time, and enjoy the rest of your meeting. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Aaron, you're up.
Yes, ma'am.
Aaron, can you turn up your volume just a little bit?
No, but I've got my handy dandy microphone here. And if I speak
Awesome.
into it, well, then sometimes that helps. If I break into a rendition of Donkey Shane, well, you'll have to cut me off.
Hoping for friends in low places.
I'm going to keep my comments pretty brief here. I know we budgeted a little bit of time for it, but I think we're all coping with the same set of circumstances and the frustrations of trying to have a virtual meeting versus a person meeting. And just one of those thoughts that crossed my mind driving down the road there, as I like to refer to it, the windshield time. The thought occurred to me that I probably, and this was said in my letter, I think I probably get more out of the individual conversations, or at least as much as I do out of the stuff on the agenda. And that's not to say that there's not value in those scheduled speakers. I really enjoyed Dr. Strum's presentation just now. I see a lot of value in that, but I also get a lot of value out of that one-on-one conversations, the hallway conversations, the cocktail hour, and so on, that it just allows me to ask really stupid questions and get really good answers. So figuring out how we overcome that has been something that I've been kind of obsessing on. And one of the things I feel like we can do moving forward is try and turn this to our advantage. And what I mean by that is maybe we can tend to a little bit more of our business, our company business, if you will, the GMDA business, through this platform, so that when we do have an opportunity to meet in person, then we have more time that allows us to explore some of these ideas. And I get to hear about things that's going on in other states, whether it's through the presentations or in the hallways. I think maybe by the time we get to our property, a lot of us have kind of got an eye on the clock, and we're ready to get out of there, and we've all got flights to catch and so on. And so maybe this will be the silver lining, if you will, allow us an opportunity to go forward, go into some of our in-person meetings. And I'm hoping we're going to be able to get back to that pretty quick. But when we do, maybe we will have been able to take care of some of our board meeting business and allow for a schedule that is more of an information exchange. So another thing that I wanted to touch on is first of all, I wanted to own up some responsibility for the proverbial fumble there on committees, because I had committed to do some work on water quality, and Dick had offered to help me if memory serves. And I have done precious little towards that end. And I guess my excuse should be COVID, because that's what I hear from everybody anymore. If something's not getting done, it's because of COVID, but I can't even blame that. I just haven't. And that's absolutely me fumbling the ball. So having said that, I think a lot of the committees that we have, that's one of the things that I see a lot of value in for the organization. And I'll use the groundwater committee well, actually it is the GMDA committee or the NWRA committee, which is our contribution there. When I sat in for the NWRA meeting, listening to their committee reports, I couldn't help but be a little impressed. Everybody they've kind of broke up the workload so that there's not one person trying to ferret out information down all of those pathways, which is absolutely the whole concept behind having these committees. And I think going forward, I'd like to see our committees be a little more active, sharing information that they have gathered. So that's another one of those random thoughts that I have had that hopefully we can pursue in the year going forward. So going back to this idea of what we're going to do virtually, I'm hoping that we can have another meeting later this year, and kind of in lieu of being able to have our in-person meetings, get back to that information sharing concept where we're able to hear some of the things going on in different areas. We all get stuck in our little rut. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on here in New Mexico, and I kind of have to step back from it and call it interesting instead of just maddening. But regardless, I really hate it when we solve a problem and then look up and see that, well, Kansas solved that same problem a few years ago. And well, that would have been helpful if I would have applied their formula instead of having to invent my own. And so the struggles that we're going through here, I think there's value in you guys hearing about that. And I really want to hear what's going on in other places. So with that, that is about all I really wanted to say during my little allocation of time. And I'd love to hear some feedback from you all and kind of make this a group effort moving forward.
Thank you, Aaron. We'll move on to reports from the state caucuses. California, you're up.
All right, this is John Woodling, and Jim, with your approval, maybe I'll jump into some things and then let you speak. And I know one thing I'd like to hear from you is status of some of your tribal issues down there in the southern desert. But California, I guess to start, as far as water conditions go, we're headed into what's looking to be a pretty dry year. The current storage in some of the major reservoirs is in the 50 to 70% of normal range. Our precipitation throughout the state, I don't think there's any place that's even at normal. Probably ranges from a few percent of normal to 60% of normal. And I think as you go south in the state, conditions get worse. Snowpack conditions in the Sierra Nevada, the snowpack ranges from about 30% of normal in the southern Sierra to 60% in the north. And then our projections for the rest of the winter, the NOAA chart for a 3-month outlook shows pretty much the whole state except the extreme north of the state being in below normal conditions for precipitation. So, I mean, we're likely gonna be in a water supply constrained condition this year, and historically, what that's meant is if you don't have surface water supplies, well, you turn to groundwater, you pump more groundwater. And I guess that leads to the next topic, and I'll provide a little bit of an update on our Sustainable Groundwater Management Act law, or SGMA as we call it. And that law passed in 2014, went into effect in 2015. So we're 6 years into this experiment with what's really local groundwater management, but with some stringent requirements that come from the state, and the potential for a state backstop and state control if requirements aren't met. And the first set of groundwater basins that really had to perform on this, there was 21 groundwater basins that were identified as critically overdrafted. in California that have had overdraft for generations, multiple decades. I think most of these basins were first identified as overdrafted in 1980, and not a lot improved over 40 years. Probably most significant is 11 of those 21 are contiguous subbasins of the San Joaquin Valley. And they collectively probably have between 1.5 million and 2.5 million acre feet of shortage annually, depending on what span of years you look at. And I think their reality is there's not a lot of surplus surface water to address any of that problem. So, over the course of the next 20 years to reach the sustainability that they have to achieve over a 20-year period, we're probably looking at something on the order of 500,000 acre feet of land that's going to have to come out of production. I think the rest of the state, the basins have plans for sustainability that are due in 2022. So a lot of those are underway now. I think the impacts won't be as devastating for some of the rest of the state, but when you add in what could happen with surface water supplies as a result of climate change, I think we'll see some pretty significant impacts elsewhere. Probably the good news that comes out of that is the state's putting a lot of money and attention into groundwater. We're getting a lot of, at the state level, a lot of improved data sets on subsidence, improved data sets updated more frequently on land use that we can use as groundwater managers. The state just recently released a contract. They're going to do aerial electromagnetic geophysics over all these alluvial basins in the state. So, I think the good news is we're getting a lot of good new data that we can use as groundwater managers. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim and see if he wants to add anything.
Before you leave, would you be on the 3-year term of directors?
I will do that. I probably, on the subject of fumbling the ball, I certainly have done that as a director of GMDA, but I am committed. I think it's a great organization. I think California hasn't maybe had the level of participation we could have, and I think that's another question on the membership side on whether we can get some additional interest from California agencies.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. I have a couple things I could add to the Sigma discussion and the groundwater discussion in California. A couple of not brand new issues, but things that are starting to come to a head. And one of them is this PFAS compounds that you've probably heard of. We're in the middle of legislation to determine what the levels are going to be acceptable. For those of you who don't know, those are compounds that are used in firefighting foam, and those sorts of things. And they can be detected in groundwater near areas that have used a lot of that, like at airports and things like that. Fortunately, in our district, we've escaped that detection. We don't have any, but there's a lot of state legislation that's going to be determining what those levels are. The second groundwater compound that has been noteworthy is the Chrome 6 struggle that we've had. As most of you know, the state mandated a very restrictive Chrome 6 standard that was unachievable. It wasn't even measurable by most standards. And they got sued. Coachella Valley Water District was one of the people, one of the agencies here in Southern California that sued the state over these levels. And they claimed that the basis of their lawsuit was that the state didn't use the economic impact in the environmental impact report of these levels, and that turned out to be a pretty big issue because the Coachella Valley Water District started spending millions and millions of dollars in treatment facilities at their well sites and whatnot, so the courts did in fact rule on that, and they're in the process of writing a new EAR with economic impact. So those are the two groundwater constituents that are in the news right now. Not much more to add on the Sigma. I think John covered it very well. In our district and a couple of our neighboring districts, we're in pretty good shape on our sustainability plans. Let's see. I guess we're categorized as a high priority basin where we are, but we're seeing our imports and recharge systems working. We're seeing our water, our well monitoring well levels coming up, and that sort of thing. I think John mentioned they have to be in compliance by the critically overdrafted basins, have to be in compliance by 2040. That's going to be really tough for the folks up in the Central Valley area, San Joaquin Valley. They don't have any surface water, and they've been pumping groundwater for decades, as John mentioned, and there's subsidence issues up there. It's the subsidence issues are actually affecting the State Water Project, and they've got subsidence in the one of the canals that feeds the State Water Project, of course, and that takes away capacity in that channel, and affects everybody that depends on that. So lots of big issues there that still need to be worked out. You wanted me to mention something about our tribal litigation. I'll just be brief. We're, as everyone knows by now, I think, at least at this group, I've reported on this before, the local Agua Caliente Band of Cuy Indians did in fact achieve a groundwater right here in the, I guess it would, to the Court of Appeals. The Ninth District Court of Appeals granted them that right, and the Supreme Court did not take it up. So they have a right to the groundwater. We still don't know what, no one really knows what that means in terms of the amount, that sort of thing. And we are now in a mandatory mediation process. I think we're going to have our third mediation meeting tomorrow morning. And currently it's a very early process, but we are studying not ultimately the not adjudication, but really the allocation of what they would want in terms of amount. And there's some other issues regarding water quality. There's some arguing about the water quality of the Colorado River that we use to refresh our replenish our aquifer. And so that'll be another one of the issues. And but it's very early on in the process, so we will see. I think we have stated publicly that ultimately the water agencies and the tribes are going to have to be partners in this resource, and work together as we use the resource for economic reasons and whatnot. So that's where that is right now. I'll keep you posted.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Colorado.
Jim. I just want to comment California provided a pretty rosy picture starting off these state reports. I think other than lack of quantity and lack of quality, everything's great in California groundwater.
Thank you. Colorado. Colorado. Going on to Kansas.
Tim Bays, is that you?
Well, I think we could probably take some turns. I'd be glad to start. So Kansas, as you all know, is a very diverse state for groundwater. A couple things I'd like to report on statewide is we now have a new chief engineer that just started his duties, I think, about 2 months ago, I think, first part of November. And also a new director of the water office. We've had some turnovers at the state offices. Locally here in South Central Kansas, the big project we've been working on, I think for about the last 2 to 3 years, has been a request by a large municipality, the city of Wichita, for some modifications to their aquifer storage and recovery project, which is we just call it the recharge project. And I think you've heard a little bit about that in the past, but in a nutshell, they essentially wanted to be able to modify the way they can gain recharge credits. Currently, they have to take those high flows out of the Little Arkansas River or out of the banks during high flow and then inject that into the aquifer to obtain credits, recharge credits, groundwater credits for later pumping. And they've asked for a change to allow those credits to be established without actually injecting the water, just by taking it directly to the city usage. So taking that surface flow to the city and getting a groundwater credit. And we are obviously opposed to that at the groundwater management district level. So we've been in a hearing process going on over a year now. Of course, it got postponed due to COVID. They submitted their request in March of 2018. So you can see we're approaching 3 years that we've been working on this, and it's spent, I don't know the total off the top of my head, over $250,000 just in legal fees and consulting fees, but we're looking at reconvening that here in a couple of weeks in a virtual sort of format. There's still an intervener group that hasn't testified. So we're not sure where that's heading, but we've been in strong opposition to that concept of getting credits without actually physically injecting the water into the aquifer. We don't believe that the state water law allows for that sort of activity. I know a lot of you look at the Central Arizona project. They do have those credits called in lieu of credits, and Kansas just doesn't have that mechanism in the Water Appropriation Act that we feel. And we're not sure it's a sound management of the aquifer on top of that, but that's where we're at locally. You know, like I said, we're very diverse here in South Central Kansas. We're pretty sustainable on our groundwater levels. We've got a few challenges. We've got some quality issues, but we're not seeing those declines where you might see in other parts of the state. We've had a pretty good last couple of years. Our water levels have been pretty steady, just like I say, some minor declines in some areas, but we've been holding pretty steady as we try to manage on a safe yield, and then trying to deal with some quality issues. We're getting ready to install probably roughly about another 30 additional monitoring wells in a salt contaminated area and oil field contamination area in parts of the district. We're getting ready to get those put in. So we're busy, but other than that, doing very well there in Central Kansas. And I'll pass it on to either Orrin or Mark for their updates.
Go ahead, Orrin.
I can't remember which conference it was that I presented on this, but I do have a little bit of an update on our ongoing issue with Quivira National Wildlife Refuge and the water resource availability for that refuge in Central Kansas. We have, over the last year or so, been working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife leadership and are in direct negotiations and discussions to come to a resolution on this issue, which is about 20 or 30 years coming. We're finally to that point to have a good conversation. And we have very recently, in the last couple of weeks, received federal funding to review our proposed solution to it through NEPA and the Watershed Act funding. And if you've ever been a part of that process, it's 2 phases. One is to evaluate your plan through NRCS, and the second phase is to obtain construction funding. We're in the first phase. So we're going to be doing NEPA review and environmental assessment process, which is a new thing for me. And so we're going into it broad-eyed, bushy-tailed, try to figure this out as we go through it. But the next phase for the funding for the construction is quite significant. And we're looking forward to that process. We believe we'll be able to secure that within the next 12 to 18 months to be able to construct this solution, to have something feasible for future generations. So we're in a much better place than we were 2 years ago, much better place than we were even a year ago. But it's a long road coming, and we're finally there. Mark?
I may just ask if Shannon would like to make a comment or two, because they have some interesting things going on in Northwest Kansas. Wayne Bossard was the predecessor up there for a number of years, and Shannon is doing an outstanding job. So Shannon, do you want to make any comments?
Well, yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks. This has been really interesting. It's my first time, buzzing in on this meeting, and we currently have 2 local enhanced management areas in our district that we're using right now. Both of them are in their 5-year period. We had one previously in the Sheridan 6 area that was seems to be pretty successful. The water table levels are beginning to pan out a little bit. So we decided to go on a more larger scale and do it district wide, just within those township areas that have a decline problem. And we scaled them back just a little bit, not quite what we did in our Sheridan 6 area, but we're starting to, it's getting really, really dry right now. Parts of us, our region, are in an extreme drought. We have seen a couple of minor overpumpers, nothing too big, but definitely keeping our eye on things as we go into year 4 of our district LEMA, as well as the year 4 of the Sheridan 6 LEMA. But it'll be the second 5-year round for it. So.
Yeah, a lot of work up there to work with your members to cut somebody back in how much irrigation water and other water that they're pumping in an organized way. So that's a big deal for Kansas.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shannon. And I just want to make a quick comment to wrap up the Kansas caucus here. GMD3 is doing one thing that's a little bit novel for us, but of course, High Plains Aquifer, using almost 2 million acre feet a year in our district. We're out of whack on stable groundwater by about 700,000 acre feet a year. So we're in the mine, and we've talked about it for many, many years. So we keep talking also in flood years in other parts of Kansas about water transfers. And it's a difficult concept to get going, particularly from a pay-go standpoint. But this year, the board elected to start some moving of water in the only way that was convenient, which was by truck. So we trucked some water from the Missouri River high flows across the state down to Southwest Kansas, released it in the Ark River, and got the permits to do that. Aquatic nuisance species, threatened, endangered, water quality, all that. And now we're in the phase of trying to share water both across Kansas and into neighboring states. And the Central Colorado Water Conservancy District is a partner in that. And so we've put the paperwork in and are working through the process. We call it a proof of concept project. So just not meant to answer all the questions, but address some of the process for transferring water. Old hat in several Western states like California and other places, but brand new in Kansas, and certainly a fear in Kansas for marketing water away from the eastern part of the state. But it makes total sense to those of us that have many millions of acre feet of storage space, but no water. And so take the flood and park it in the aquifer is certainly a concept, but we'll start with a truckload or two and run it to Western Kansas and to partner areas like the Central Colorado Water Conservancy District. And then we'll help everybody in the permitting process and in the project vision process start to develop how those projects might work and what partnerships and values might we add where we might actually have something that has a business plan that will work. But that's just sort of starting. We call it proof of concept projects. And we look forward to some interstate. So I also want to run some down to Texas too, but I haven't got a confirmed Texas partner yet. So I'll put that plug out there, CE and Steve and others. That's the Kansas report.
Linda, I think Colorado might have fixed their mic issues. Is that true, Colorado?
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Sorry about that technology. It's me. I'm not smart enough to run it. But hello, everybody. On the screen, you can see just a one pager that we put together with some thoughts going on around here. To start off with, regarding climate, and the bigger issue for state officials here in Colorado is what's Colorado and the upper basin states doing in regards to the river compact with kind of dwindling snowpack. They've kind of come up with this term called demand management, which is, can some of these high mountain ranches figure out different ways to idle some of their irrigated pastures, get fewer cuttings of grass, in turn get paid for that. There's some grants and some funds being donated by entities such as the Walton Foundation, et cetera, to help fund some of these research activities. It's really been pretty tough to get going on the western slope. A lot of these ranches have been in the family names for generations. They've never even had measuring weirs to measure the water that comes out of the stream or river or creek that feeds their ranch. So it's been kind of tough for them to get behind this process, but that's kind of what's going on in the bigger picture in Colorado, and mainly from surface water, since we are primarily a surface water state. Lack of snowfall in that second paragraph. Every time we have drought years, we get fires, and we had 2 fires this year that became the largest, number 1 and number 2 in recorded history. The Cameron Peak Fire, 209,000 acres. The East Troublesome Fire being 195,000 acres in size. Those 2 are both in the watershed that supplies drinking water for the Front Range. Obviously a really big concern with all the population. I think there was about 18 or 20 fires all in total, and it burned 625,000 acres in total across the state. And we obviously were not the only state with wildfires, so we feel for the damage in other western states as well. So as you can kind of see in the text there, of course, concerned with this, these wildfires relate to ash and debris and sedimentation that end up in these storage reservoirs. It's kind of hard to get that odor and that soot out of the water. So there's obviously drinking water concerns. Growth is continuing. That's that next paragraph. Water rights out of the South Platte River Basin. There's confirmed sales of upwards of $25,000 an acre foot for senior surface water rights. That last sentence, it isn't made up. It's pretty common to have a water tap fee for a new house to be constructed to be $80,000 to $100,000 just for your tap fee. That doesn't include buying the lot. So there's a big supply and demand gap here. That relates to next paragraph, alluvial groundwater. So a lot of the Denver metro areas, their backbone or plan for water supply for their developments was Denver Basin deep bedrock aquifers, thought to have hundreds of years of water supply. After they tapped into those, they realized that those aquifers had a shelf life much shorter than what they anticipated. So kind of the newer thing that's happening is they're getting into the business that Central Water Conservancy District and our members kind of getting into our backyard by drilling wells in the alluvial aquifers that are tied to the river streams, doing treatment like such as reverse osmosis to treat these water as alluvial groundwater, treat it and ship it up miles of pipelines back south into the metro area. So it creates conditions, struggles between the municipalities wanting to protect the water quality, creates concerns with those that are still pumping that alluvial groundwater. Is the yield of our wells going to decline? And you can just imagine the conflicts when traditionally, historically irrigated farm ground is dotted with well fields along a corridor there. So there are some struggles going on in our backyard. More locally, the 2020 dry season, most of our members in Central's augmentation plans, they're members mainly because they utilize their alluvial wells as a supplemental supply. And we recognize that last summer, our members pumped 83% of their allocation, which is 25% more than the previous year. And, 2019 really wasn't that wet of a year either. So it kind of gives you an idea or a glimpse of kind of the conditions we were in. I think I can recall 2 or 3 measurable rain events all summer long up here in the Greeley area. So it was not good. A couple days ago when I typed this letter, South Platte Basin snowpack is 72%, which is down 10% from just 4 or 5 days prior too. So we're hoping that we get some more snow and like I says, keeping our fingers crossed. So Everett or Don or Billy, anything else to add?
We're going to have wind events in the next 2 days. It'll be 100 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And dry it out some more.
Right. Yeah. We're in that La Nina situation, which the predominant moisture patterns for us here in Colorado is the Pacific moisture that comes in from the north. It'll benefit the northwestern mountains. Will be kind of average here in the north central part of the state. But the southern half, basically from I-70 that goes east and west out of Denver, they anticipate in typical La Nina, very poor snow conditions, but we'll see what happens. I think it's supposed to be 62 degrees in Denver tomorrow. Not very common.
25 the next day.
Yeah. That's it from Colorado. Unless you got any questions.
Louisiana, you're next.
Hey, this is Gary Beard. I'm with the Capital Area Groundwater Conservation District. Just to present to you what I have here. I'll share the screen. We're just going to kind of outline to you some of our intermediate. Can everybody see that? Is the screen visible?
I'm not seeing it.
It's not.
Don't think so, sir.
Here we go. No, that's the end.
How about that? Is that visible?
Yes.
Okay. I just kind of go through with you some of the intermediate and long-term goals that we have here. Again, I became the executive director here at the Capital Area Groundwater Conservation District just a few months ago. So I'll just kind of outline to you what we're doing in the immediate future, as well as our long-term goals. We've implemented a complete engineering and strategic analysis with the Water Institute of the Gulf, as well as increased testing with USGS and LSU to create a three-dimensional modeling. And we're going to complete that in our short-term, intermediate over the next couple of years. And in addition, we're going to increase our pumping and constituent data collection and implement a system-wide metering program so that all 400 wells in the 6 parishes will have meters both for flow and for constituent data testing. And of course, at the same time, we're going to go ahead and implement new funding mechanisms and alternatives, make some new budget recommendations to the board. And of course, some of that may require legislation. I'm sure it will, to make sure that everything moves smoothly ahead. And while we're doing all that, we're just going to increase our public awareness because, as you probably aware of, we have a saltwater intrusion problem that's gone past the fault line, which runs through Baton Rouge, and we're getting some salt water close to our southernmost wells. The engineering and strategic analysis is being conducted by the Water Institute of the Gulf with their engineers at Freeze and Nichols, and of course LSU and USGS. LSU is doing the three-dimensional modeling, and USGS is doing the testing for us for the chlorides. In that engineering and strategic analysis, we've done some scavenger well. We put in a scavenger well. We're looking at that also. But I think one of the biggest things is going to be the reclaimed water facilities. I had some personal experience with reclaimed water facilities, both here in the U.S. as well as in New Zealand. And we believe that we can implement some of those types of facilities here, especially for industry and for irrigation, be able to cut back on the amount of our groundwater supply that's being used for those purposes. We're also going to try to use a program similar to what I did at the California Institute for Men over in California, put together a testing program so that inmates there can get accreditation and licensure for reclaimed water facilities while they're there. And then we're going to also seek out additional capital outlay from the state of Louisiana. We're going to look at some cooperative endeavor agreements on financing, especially like on the metering program. Also going to seek out federal assistance and corporate donations at the same time to try to get some monies as best as possible to reduce, of course, the fees that are being paid by the local users. As far as long term, of course, always the sustainability and the preservation of aquifers is our primary goal. And we're going to continue to work with the engineers and scientists to implement the reclaimed water facilities, the clarification plants on the Mississippi River, to bring to industry as much as possible. We're going to maximize our additional funding outside of our current rate structure and establish a regional rate structure that promotes conservation. We're going to implement automatic metering and well monitoring systems so that as it is right now, it's based on the honor system, and that's not sufficient. So we're going to go to a metering system using SCADA and also well monitoring with chloride so that we can make sure that we have a good handle on where that saltwater plume is at the, especially at the 2,000 and 1,500, 2,000 foot levels. We're going to implement, as soon as we finish the engineering, we'll implement a program management and construction program for these, all of these new all the new infrastructure and the new facilities. During my tenure in the House of Representatives, we were fortunate to be able to draft and pass legislation similar to California Title 22 reclaimed water standards. We implemented, we passed that bill. It's now in the Reclaimed Water Law of Louisiana. It's not mandatory use of reclaimed water, but it encourages it. And at the same time, we passed another series of pieces of legislation that creates a credit system so that those people who use reclaimed water get credits for that stream segment to be able to provide, and that's of course transferable and tradable credits, so that they can use those as maybe a way of marketing and use that for monetary sources of being able to offset the cost of using and using reclaimed water, but the cost associated with the construction of those facilities. And we're also going to do a continued public outreach. We're implementing right now a video presentation, and that'll be used for the general public, and to go out and to be able to explain all of these new things that we're doing, just to inform the public and educate them about our groundwater. You know, we're blessed here in South Louisiana with an abundance of good groundwater, and we just want to do everything we can to protect it. And just to make sure everybody's aware of the fact that, yeah, we have saltwater intrusion into the aquifers, but it's not anything that can't be handled, and that we're moving forward rather quickly, but with good science and good engineering to be able to solve the problem and provide a great source of water for the generations to come. So that's about it from capillary groundwater. I tried to make it quick. I know everybody's got a long way to go, so happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
We'll move on to Mississippi.
Don, why don't you give that?
Thank you, Madam President. This is Don Christie. I'm going to start off by letting Ben talk a little bit about one of the issues, of course, that is predominant in Mississippi's water scenario, and that is the Supreme Court case that's going on between Mississippi and Tennessee with regard to usage in the northern part of the state. So Ben, if you want to update folks on that, I'd appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Don. Good afternoon to all of you. Miss not seeing you twice a year. So the Sparta Sand Aquifer lies beneath Mississippi and in part beneath Tennessee. Mississippi has had litigation pending and is in the Supreme Court now over the ownership of that aquifer. Our claim has been that Tennessee was extracting groundwater from what was essentially the property of Mississippi for years. Claim was made for damages. The special master from Kentucky just issued his report on November 5, 2020. He rejected Mississippi's position and ruled that the aquifer beneath Mississippi, from which Tennessee has been extracting the groundwater for years, is an interstate resource. That would trigger, if it's upheld by the Supreme Court, equitable apportionment as a proper remedy. It's never been applied to groundwater, but we're looking at that as a possible outcome. If the Supreme Court agrees with the special master, Mississippi will have to choose whether to avail itself of the remedy of equitable apportionment. That would be ordered, and it's only been ordered in interstate water disputes involving surface water, but that would be ordered as a result of a final resolution of the case. If Mississippi refuses to seek equitable apportionment, the case will be dismissed. The Supreme Court has had its hands full, as you all know, with election disputes for the last several months. And when they get around to dealing with this and other cases, we'll see whether they agree or split the baby, or whether there's a mixed bag of a ruling that will take some time to figure out. We don't really know how to predict it. The special master was fairly lighthearted and humorous in his ruling, but the bottom line is that Mississippi's claim for ownership of this aquifer has been rejected, and we're back to the remedy of equitable apportionment, which all of you Western state folks would be quite familiar with, but it's never been applied in this context. We'll hopefully have some more update on that within the next 3 to 5 months.
Just going to touch on a couple of other issues that we've got ongoing here. Of course, over the past 2 or 3 years, we've had really wet years in Mississippi, which have resulted in flooding of substantial areas in the South Delta. And that flooding is in many cases taken quite a bit of land out of production in that part of the state. To address that, the Mississippi Levee Board and the Corps of Engineers has been working on the Yazoo Backwater Pump Project to try to move that water off areas in the South Delta. They've been trying to get a lot of that work closed out here over the past few months, and are hoping to get some of that completed here shortly. YMD is not a local sponsor of that project, but our board has certainly been a strong proponent of the Yazoo Backwater Pump Project. In addition, we have been working with USGS in the Mississippi Alluvial Plain project that they've had ongoing. We've had a lot over the past 2 years of airborne geophysical survey data that have been collected to support the regional groundwater flow model project. USGS tells us that they've analyzed most of that data, and the data have been supplied for the flow model project, and that we hope to have a model that we can begin using for decision support for whether it's well field projects or weir projects sometime in the spring and summer of this year. The semi-annual well survey data that we collect every twice a year in April and October have shown some increases in static water levels in areas of the Delta. Part of that has been attributable to, of course, those wetter years, but I think also part of it has been attributable to the fact that we've had some well-timed precipitation events during the growing season that have resulted in decreased irrigation on various crops here in the Delta. That is about it for us. Be happy to take any questions if someone has any.
Thank you. Nebraska, you're up.
Okay, Madam President, with your permission, I'm going to try to share my screen. I don't know if Randy Ray had trouble. I don't know if I have a hope, but okay, can everybody see that all right? Just quick PowerPoint presentation regarding Nebraska's Water Sustainability Fund. We've had it just long enough now that we're starting to work the bugs out. We have some successes. There's also some more controversial things. And it just happens to be fortuitous that the state of Nebraska's Department of Natural Resources just released a story map yesterday. And so this group is actually the first entity that gets to publicly view it. So thank you for being my guinea pigs with this. I'll take any feedback up the chain of command. But in any case, the Water Sustainability Fund was developed in 2014 by state legislator. It was supposed to meet the requirements laid out by that legislation. And the Natural Resource Commission oversees the fund, but as I stated, Nebraska Department of Natural Resources administers the fund. So all the funding is piped through our state DNR. So of the funding, 10% is automatically designated to wastewater projects in Omaha. An additional 10% goes to small project requests, which the cutoff is $250,000. Anything else is for a large cap or a larger fund. And additionally, this money can go towards matching of federal grants. So it can actually help meet that local match and extend your project a lot further by utilization of state funding. So the overall goal of natural resources is to provide financial assistance to eligible projects. And it just so happens that our state's groundwater management districts or natural resource districts are a good caveat to get it done. So what I have here is a display of our small cap, large cap, and of course the Omaha wastewater or Omaha sewer treatment, which is the red dot you see on the east end of the state. To me, their labeling's wrong. I would have green being the large cap ones, but they have in this case blue. So blue is what your larger funding financial projects are. Green are your smaller stuff. And you can see there's a pretty good diversification across east to west, north to south. So what that looks like as far as natural resources go, try to get to that next slide. Here's our 23 natural resource districts based on river boundaries across the state. And of that, 17 have already utilized or are currently utilizing water sustainability funds. And with that, I'm going to try to jump over to the story map. So here's the story map. I guess, Kristen, is that coming across okay for you? Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So like I said, the state of Nebraska just released this story map. They were just working out the final bugs and it just went public, I believe, yesterday. So GMDA gets to be the first group to actually see this. But this, as I mentioned, was released through legislation.
Hey, Tyler. Hey, Tyler,
Yeah.
This is Dick. Sorry, I've just got your map, your NRD map up. I'm not seeing the story map.
Let me try. How's that?
Sorry, there you go. Yeah, I think Kristen just thought that what you had was what we're supposed to be seeing. So, nope, looks like you're good to go. Thanks.
Appreciate the assist. All right. So as I mentioned, released by state statute and funding legislation to get us the money. The commission again administers the fund, the natural resource district or the Department of Natural Resource District administers it. The NRDs hopefully utilize the benefit of the funding. And so overall, the goal is to promote healthy watersheds, improve water quality, and protect future generations to meet water needs. Again, here's the small cap and the large cap funds. And as of last year or 2 years ago, I guess, 2019, there's been more than $61 million in grant funding awarded to successful applicants. And as you saw, very good diversity across the state. So what they have showcased here, as you scroll through the map, you'll see various examples. In this particular case, Hastings, one of our larger communities in central Nebraska, did aquifer storage and nitrate and uranium control as far as reverse osmosis on a large scale facility for improving their water treatment facilities and water distribution programs. So that's one of their success stories. I don't want to get too far into the funding, but as you can see, there's quite a bit of legislative findings associated with this, but I did want to hit a little bit more on the goals. So the financial assistances go towards projects, programs, activities that increase aquifer recharge, reduce aquifer depletion, help stream flow, mitigate threats to drinking water as far as quality goes, promote integrated management plans or groundwater management plans for each of the natural resource districts, contribute to municipal supply. Again, the big ones: agricultural uses, municipal, industrial, recreational, commercial, wildlife conservation, and the preservation of water resources. Assist municipalities with facilities and infrastructure, specifically with sewer, and provide water productivity and cost-effective solutions. A big part of this study, or at least the funding that's been released thus far, has gone towards research, data, and modeling. And I'm going to turn over to Dick here in just a little bit, but we've done a lot of AEM similar to what John's been doing out in California. And also there's been some rehab and restoration that I myself am personally involved with as far as our district goes. And then again, conjunctive management with the state and other agencies and cooperation. So here's Lincoln. the Dead Man's Run. So this is a flooding improvement through downtown Lincoln. Dick probably lives near there, so he can tell you a lot more about it than I know. But in any case, this fund really promotes collaboration between the various entities involved. So we have, of course, our Department of Natural Resources, which administers our surface water rights, the University of Nebraska. We have state lotto funds that are dedicated through an environmental trust. Department of Environment and Energy, which used to be known as our environmental quality. And then, of course, Nebraska Game Parks, which is our game and fish program. But the more, it seems like the more entities you get involved, the higher ranking you get, the more apt you're likely to get funds. So the intent is to try to distribute the money as far as statewide goes to the greatest extent possible for long-term, to giving priority for those which result in federal mandates. And there again, we've between 2015 and 2019, there were 60 projects funded, of total $61.7 million across the state. And I will give Kristen a copy or a link to this if anybody's interested. What I hope to get from this is some emulation. Hopefully you guys can go to your own legislators and learn from our mistakes and try to repeat as possible. Let me get down to AEM. Here we go. Dick, do you want to touch a little bit on NRA?
Yeah, be happy to, Tyler. I really didn't have a whole lot prepared, but yeah, as Tyler's mentioned, you know, the NRDs have used this funding for a lot of different things, but the one that I'm most familiar with, and you've heard several presentations at past conferences about the airborne electromagnetic surveying in Nebraska, using WSF, individual NRD funds, some other funding sources. Oh, I don't have the figure at my fingertips, but we've flown several tens of thousands of line miles of airborne electromagnetic surveys over the state, encompassing well over half of the NRDs. And so now most of that initial surveying is wrapping up. And we're now trying to figure out what to do with the data and integrate it into our groundwater management activities. So really, you know, it has really changed the way we look at the groundwater situation in Nebraska. It's been a great partnership between the NRDs, the state, the University of Nebraska. Always got to throw out a cheer there for the Eastern Nebraska Water Resources Assessment. Katie Cameron, who's been running that for several years. She's been kind of a driving force in this whole AEM data collection thing. So really, it's just another a major use of WSF funds, and the NRDs are really starting to integrate this data into their groundwater management activities. What you see right there now is something called the Nebraska GeoCloud, which is, you can kind of think of it as a one-stop repository, not only for the AEM database, but for a lot of other groundwater databases. We are in the process of getting that AEM data into the GeoCloud, where people can pull it down, take a look at it, manipulate it, and integrate it with other things like water quality data, geologic data, things like that. So that's just really a very brief overview about it, and we'll certainly try to answer any questions that anybody might have. I know Brian Bruckner and Paul from Papio are out there too. If you guys have anything you want to jump in on that, please do so.
Yeah, thanks, Dick. This is Brian Bruckner with the Lower Elkhorn NRD up in the northeast part of the state. So Dick mentioned the AEM data, the AEM concept, which our district has invested heavily in that. We have a comprehensive grid of our entire district, at least a 3-mile grid, numerous block flights in our district as well. And we have taken the additional step of utilizing and integrating that data into the development of a multidimensional groundwater model. And so that's a work in progress as we speak. That's been a partnership with the state of Nebraska. And so we're excited to see the utilization of that. It's going to be the first time that the AEM data has been integrated into a groundwater model in a portion of Nebraska that's heavily glaciated. So we're anxious to share our success or failure, I guess, with the group. So stay tuned.
And then just to hit on a few more highlights, you can kind of see this map is pretty intuitive, but City of Omaha, obviously they get 10% off automatically for their sewer overflow. As you progress across the state, you can see the tours here. Hastings with your utility aquifer, uranium and nitrate control. Lincoln with the water system and drought resiliency. And that's actually been utilized by a number of the districts. I know Central Platte, Lower Elkhorn, my district, Lower Loop, and a bunch of the contingent down in the lower Platts are utilizing that for drought management, essentially going forward. City of Mitchell, way out west, is doing their wastewater upgrades. Frenchman Cambridge, which is actually an irrigation district, is enhancing with their retiming project, increasing their efficiencies in their water delivery systems over the long term. And then a little more controversial topic, Platte River Republican River diversion is at least slated to receive financing for studying the ability to take excess flows off the Platte River and meet the interstate compact between Nebraska and Kansas. But again, very controversial topic, and yeah, interesting way to get a room divided. There's some structure improvements through the city of Papillion and our own Columbus area recharge project, which is we're taking wastewater from a corn ethanol plant and diverting it back into a abandoned channel or a creek and utilizing structures to hold that water back to essentially get artificial retiming and recharging in a system. We're also captivating or capturing that water and diverting it up into a sand pit or an abandoned red gravel pit that currently has houses all around it, and using that as a recharge timing as well. So this whole system is supposed to offset the pumping that's taking place at the ethanol plant, as well as in the city of Columbus itself. So a very convoluted, but very good project that we're hoping comes to fruition in the near future. And then University got their piece in on quantifying the effects of eastern red cedar on encroaching on the sandhills. So there's been a lot of discussion about how much water eastern red cedar actually utilizes. Sandhills of Nebraska are one of the more unique geologic features across all of the High Plains aquifer. And so you can see they're doing some study there looking at the effects long term. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop talking. I'll answer any questions. Otherwise, I'll be happy to share this information. And if anybody has any questions, you can be directed there appropriately. Unless Linda or Lyndon, did I miss anything?
This is Steve. I don't have any questions, but any of these presentations today that y'all provide, if you'll send them to us, we will disseminate them out to our membership, just to let you know.
We'll be happy to.
This is John Woodling. I have a comment question. I'm not sure what it is. A great presentation on the projects from the fund. I'd be curious, and I think it's also worthwhile to characterize what amount of federal funding that state funding may have leveraged. I think that can go a long way politically in supporting the program, and also, you know, what kind of local funding. I guess ultimately this is all local because it comes from the taxpayers, but what kind of local funding match the state funding to really leverage getting these things done as well?
I know, speaking for ourselves on our AEM flights, the Natural Resource District just budgets that local share the full amount when we go collect our AEM data. As far as our Columbus, which is a large scale or a large size project, we did receive a U.S. Bureau of Rec Drought Resiliency grant. So we're using some water sustainability funds to match those dollars as well. And then the county, the city of Columbus, and even the ethanol plant themselves have participated in that. So we really had a lot of players contributing dollars to go towards the advancement of that. That's just all my two projects I'm familiar with. I know some of the other guys could chime in on theirs as well.
Yeah, John, this is Dick from Lower Platte South. It's pretty much all over the board on that. Our AEM, at least recently, has been dominantly state and NRD funding early on in the AEM collection date activity. USGS kicked in some analytical capabilities and some other things on that, but at least for our district, dominantly, it has been a combination of local and state funding for that. Now, I'm not as familiar with some of the flood control stuff that our district does. My guess is that there is federal funding that's leveraged in there, but I really can't speak to the amount. But yeah, I think that's probably would be a good exercise to kind of do that analysis to see what kind of leverage we're getting on that.
Yeah, I mean, years ago, I managed these grant programs for California at the state level, and I mean that was always a good selling point. Is yeah, okay, the state invested $60 million, but the reality was that was several hundred million in projects that got done.
Yeah, for any WSF projects, it's a 60-40 split between the state and the local sponsor. So we put 40% of our local dollars up to match the 60% that was extremely appreciated. So
this is Mark. I missed it, I guess, but Tyler, what's the source of the WSF funds?
Nebraska state funding through legislation.
So it's just general funds?
I believe so.
yep, I think that's correct. There's no federal sources there. It's all state funds.
Wow. What a great commitment to water.
Thank you. Moving on to New Mexico.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would ask if AJ is tuned in, if he wanted to get us started. If not, we'll all from there. AJ, are you online and unmuted?
I'm tuned in, but I left it up to you to make the presentation, given I was litigating for the last month.
Well, that I had intended to keep our comments brief, and just in case you're wondering, all we can see is the top of your head when you turn the mic on there. So, or turn the camera on, but that maybe that's a blessing. Oh no, we can see your whole face now. That's worse. On in Mexico, I spent a lot of time. One of the things that AJ just mentioned with the litigating, the district has been involved in a piece of litigation that I think is something that other states are going to see a lot of, and it's certainly something that keeps cropping up around here. And an unofficial term that was applied to it that I thought was pretty apt was zombie rights. So essentially what we've got is we've got some rights that haven't been exercised in a long time, and we saw an application to transfer those into the oil field. Of course, when the oil field is booming around here, that water it commands a premium. And so, of course, we're not real keen on the idea of a big withdrawal from our system that wasn't part of our accounting. It makes it really difficult to try and balance your water equation when you have withdrawals happening that you hadn't anticipated. So we've got this case going with these zombie rights that are being resurrected that everyone kind of thought were dead, and we'll see what happens with those. Another piece of litigation, of course, most of y'all are probably on some level aware of. New Mexico is fighting with Texas again. This time, we just concluded a disagreement on the Pecos, and we were actually, New Mexico was victorious on that, and that had to do with some storage and evaporation losses on the Pecos River. But the one that's getting most of our attention is over on the Rio Grande right now. That one promises to have some real ramifications to the state of New Mexico. And one of the things that one of the responses that was prompted by that litigation is New Mexico's attempt on the Rio Grande, on the lower Rio Grande, to try and get a better handle on the groundwater depletions. Of course,
Aaron, if I might add something.
Yes, sir.
The Texas v. New Mexico on the Rio Grande is really, we're really talking about apportionment, but the U.S., the BOR, is arguing that somehow they should be able to mandate to the state of New Mexico the amount of groundwater that is appropriated, despite the fact that by statute, New Mexico has the administrative authority over its groundwater. As some of you know, I represented a large number of farmers over in the valley, in the lower Rio Grande Valley. And our position has always been that groundwater, it's a state sovereignty issue, that the groundwater is subject to Mexico State administration and the laws of the state of New Mexico and the Constitution of New Mexico. And so mixed in this whole litigation that's been going on for many years now, as many of you know, is this issue of can the U.S. and can the state of Texas dictate to the state of New Mexico the amount of groundwater that's appropriated by the farmers, if you may, the city, or is that going to become all part of the project water? And if it's project water, then does the U.S. Have a right of administration over that groundwater, over that water, both the surface and the groundwater? And does it also have some type of say in the amount of water, recognizing that one would start with the argument that the government, the U.S., only has a right of diversion, storage, and delivery as to the project water. So couple that with what's taken place in the Mississippi versus Tennessee litigation. I'm going to be curious to see what Mississippi intends to do, given the special master's invitation to Mississippi to be able to refile and argue that there should be some type of allocation of the groundwater between the many states, subject to a compact, if you may. So that is still out there and worthwhile considering. So now, Aaron, I hadn't written anything up. You hadn't told me I was supposed to be talking about anything here. And so with that, I'll say goodnight, Irene.
Thank you, AJ. And that was really what I was hoping you would address on as far as the New Mexico v. Texas there. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was that New Mexico was doing is most of you might refer to it as a fallowing program, where New Mexico is contemplating how it can incentivize not diverting water or specifically pumping water. Well, some of the bureaucrats got a hold of it and didn't like the idea that we were using tax dollars to pay individuals and thought there would be some antitrust law violations there. So it's not referred to anymore as a fallowing program, it's a grant program. So New Mexico now has a grant program on the lower Rio Grande. And the ambition of that is to incentivize fallowing of farmland, therefore reducing groundwater depletion. So there's been some money set aside by the legislature to try and get this project up and rolling. And we will keep you posted as to the success or failure of that. And with that, Madam Chair, I will turn over the microphone to, I think, what did we got? The state of North Dakota, if there's anybody here representing them.
Thank you.
I believe North Dakota left the meeting early. They had another meeting to attend.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. How about Texas?
This is C.E. Williams, and I'll make it short. Today, we started our Texas legislative session today at noon. I never saw so much plexiglass in a Senate chamber that I don't know whether we'll ever be able to get into the building or not to make any kind of comments directly to them or not, but it's going to be very different. But as you know, we've got major issues to address here in Texas. Not the least of which is health and safety issues due to the coronavirus, education, and our legislature is required to balance the budget. And the comptroller had just put out a statement of here a few days ago that they're going into it with almost $1 billion deficit as we start into the 2-year period. So I say all this mainly for the point, I don't see a lot of water issues floating to the top that are in need of addressing in this legislative session. Granted, there'll be some that are offered and some that are done, but I just think all the energy will probably be done on other issues that are more important. And we too here in Texas are in a pretty severe drought, as many of y'all are from here and going west. In our particular district here, we get roughly 19 inches of summertime rainfall, and we ended up the year between 7 and 8 inches short. So that tells you pretty quick how dry we really are right in through here. I think some of Steve's counties up on the very northern part are in better shape than what we are, but here through the central part of the Texas Panhandle are extremely dry. We're about halfway through our GMA process of which is our 5-year planning process that we have to update. It's going pretty good, and everything seems to be pretty much on track. Everything else is pretty much normal. Steve, you got anything you want to add, or Gene?
No, you did a good job covering this. It's dry here too.
I think wildfires are going to be, I noticed somebody mentioned that earlier. I think they could be a real problem come spring with the spring winds that we normally get. And, but we're resilient and we will survive, I guess. Madam Chairman, that's all I have.
Are there any, thank you. Are there any other states?
We didn't hook Florida after that wonderful meeting down there, 5 years ago.
It seems like it's 5 years ago, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Treasurer and membership reports, Steve? Jim? Is it muted?
Steve's on mute.
Steve, are you on mute?
Give me a sec, I'll go check on him.
I'm fixed now. Madam President, I see that we passed the director slots. Have you planned on doing that as far as filling in the directors for this next year?
We can do that now, or we can do that when we do elections. Either way, we can do that now.
Okay, so whatever you want to do, I can go ahead and do the members treasurer's report. The treasurer's report was attached to your packet. A couple things that I'll need to have happen this year is that at the end of the year, at the end of this through December 31st, we have about 112,000. Make sure I get the right number. $112,917 and 2 cents in the bank. You can read that report. All the board members received it. This next year, our NWRA dues are going to be the same as this year for $14,205. There's probably about $1,725 in open invoices now, meaning we're waiting on payment of dues, which is pretty good from 8 members. Our membership right now is we have 40 paid members. We'd like to see, and 9 honorary lifetime members. I have 2 proposed motions. I'd request that the board accept the Secretary Treasurer's report and finance and membership through December 31st of 2020, and move that the board approve payment of NWRA groundwater caucus dues in the amount of $14,205. That ends my report and request.
Thank you. Do I have a motion for that?
This is Jim Chiaffi. I'll move.
Is there a second?
Aaron Bollock to second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to accept the treasurer's report. All in favor, say aye. Any
Aye.
nays? Okay,
Aye.
thank you.
Madam Chair, did you want a second motion to approve the payment to NWRA for dues?
If you would,
I would make that a motion then.
thank you. Is there a second?
This is Tyler from Nebraska. I'll second.
Thank you. Are there any nays on this motion? If not, motion carried. We'll go to the NWRA report. Mark, are you giving, who's giving that one?
I'd be happy to make some comments. Maybe, well, I'll make a couple of comments. I noticed Ian is on, as well as AJ and Randy Ray, and I think that's the core that I think that's on here that tends to represent us in the groundwater caucus.
Well, Mark, this
yeah.
is AJ. Ian's there, and I said, if Ian's still on, I bet he can give us the best NWRA report there is on everything with NWRA.
You are so always a wise person, AJ. So you take it away.
Hello, Jim Chudwick.
Well, thanks, Mark and AJ. And first, let me say thank you guys for the dues, approval of dues. I really appreciate the partnership that we have here. GMDA makes a very meaningful contribution to NWRA in our policy formulation and in our advocacy efforts. And one of the things that we just actually wrapped up today was sending a letter to the Biden administration, the incoming administration, and to all the congressional leaders, and then all the congressional offices to highlight the work that, or the importance of water infrastructure, because one of the first things that Congress is going to be doing here in the next few weeks is turning towards COVID-19 recovery. And we made the case that if you're looking at economic recovery, stimulating the economy, investing in water infrastructure is probably one of the best things you can do for a couple of reasons. One, it's an immediate job creator for those projects that are ready to go. And then 2, it creates long-term economic growth, because I don't care what the industry is, you can't have it if there's no water. It's a pretty good group. We had about 200 different organizations sign on, had very strong representation from both urban water users, rural water users, irrigation districts, and obviously I was so appreciative of GMDA signing onto the letter, because it brings that continued focus on the importance of groundwater into the conversation. So that's a copy of the letter up there on the screen. And thank you to Mark and President Luby for their assistance in getting on that letter. We are right now looking at, we just actually wrapped up our the first part of our leadership meeting. We're continuing that over the next couple of weeks. And one thing I want to note for folks is on February 12th, we'll be holding a groundwater caucus meeting through NWRA. And all of you obviously are NWRA members. And so love to have you participate in that. We'll be talking about a number of things, but including how we kind of strategize on groundwater issues moving into, throughout the next year on some of the policy things. I will give a real quick presentation that just gives a update over some of the items that happened right at the end of last year, and then some of the things that we're looking at moving into the coming year. And I'll defer to AJ or Mark or Lyndon or anybody that wants to hop on and weigh in on these things. But the first thing I wanted to touch on was just in December, literally right before the holidays, Congress passed an omnibus bill, which included really three important provisions. One was funding for water resources and water infrastructure. We saw strong funding numbers for the Bureau of Reclamation, about 1.69 billion, and over 7 billion for the Army Corps of Engineers. The omnibus bill, in addition to the appropriations, which is important, also included WRDA 2020, which was a priority for us, and also had Western Water Title included in it. And we were excited to see that those Western Water provisions get included, in part because one of those bills that got kind of stuck in at the last minute was aquifer recharge and flexibility legislation that was introduced by Senator Risch out of Idaho. Basically, this authorizes Bureau of Reclamation facilities to be used for transferring water for groundwater recharge. And most of a good deal of the water infrastructure, at least in the Western US, is Bureau of Reclamation. And so having the ability to move water around for the specific purpose of recharge, I think is helpful. There was also some good legislation included on invasive species, trying to increase the amount of inspection stations that are out there to combat invasive species. It is something that I think was just mentioned by several folks. Wildfire. There was a little bit of funding for the Cooperative Watershed Management Program, which doesn't do a ton on wildfire, but it is a step in the right direction. It is some good money. And then for forecasting, which I know is important to all of you, some USGS reauthorizations, including a snow water supply forecasting. So that, it's kind of interesting. We had 2 years of buildup trying to get that stuff done. And then really in the last 2 weeks of the session of Congress, it all got taken care of. So we're taking that mindset forward into the 117th Congress. And as we flagged for you there, we're already sending letters up to key decision makers, trying to make sure that they are keyed into the water and some of the priority issues. As I mentioned, NWRA, we just held our first part of our leadership forum where we discussed what some of our priorities were going to be this year. And this is the top 10 that came out of that conference. Number one is infrastructure funding. I think that's something that, based on the presentations and conversations we've held earlier, I know resonates with all of you. Funding is critical and key for everyone. We're also continuing to see an importance with regulations, Clean Water Act being number one. There is some uncertainty as far as what's going to happen with that moving forward with the Biden transition. He could direct the Justice Department to kind of pivot in how they're defending the Navigable Waters Protection Rule in court. It's not really clear what the future holds for the Clean Water Act, but it is still important to many of our members. And as a number of folks did, Mark, I want to compliment you for the doctor's presentation. That was fascinating. I'm going to have to follow up with you to get her contact info, because I think she'd provide a lot of good information for others as well. And we might want to tap her for one of our upcoming meetings. But COVID-19 relief. And I think that I'll put that in kind of two forms. One is the funding, as we've mentioned earlier, and stimulus. And then two, we've been contacted by a number of different water providers noting that they have incurred increased costs due to their efforts to combat COVID-19, keep staff healthy. And as you guys know, water providers are frontline employees. So they have essential functions that they have to carry out. And so we'll continue pushing for funding for that. ESA, forest health, invasive species, and NEPA were also key issues that we're going to be working on this year. And then I want to touch on groundwater supply augmentation and development. Groundwater has always been something that during my time with NWRA, we've seen as a priority. And I think it continues to grow. It was a top priority for at least half of our member states. And so we will be continuing to work on that. We are going to be working on a couple of drafting ideas for legislative proposals for funding for different types of infrastructure. And we're going to include groundwater in that. We're also, I always say this when we talk about groundwater and federal issues, we also bear front in mind that anytime we're dealing with groundwater, you need to have strong state involvement and deference to the states, especially when it comes to any water rights associated with that development. Another groundwater associated item that we're looking at is the continuing development of procedures and potential regulations surrounding PFAS chemicals that are found in groundwater. Largely a municipal water issue right now, but I know that it could and likely may eventually transfer over to an agricultural issue as well. And then the final item is tax code, and that really references trying to bring back the advanced refunding of bonds, which is, you know, many of you are probably aware, but I wasn't really familiar with this process until about 2 years ago. And in a nutshell, it's being able to, if you've taken out a bond previously, being able to refinance that bond if you're able to find a lower rate. So I think about it as you know, kind of refinancing your house, but for a water infrastructure project, and you can realize some savings there. So those are kind of the top 10 priorities we're looking at this year. Obviously, we have a number of other issues we're going to be working on, but that's really where a lot of our focus is going to be put. And then I don't know if, did you guys want me to talk a little bit about what Congress looks like right now, or just kind of take questions and move on to the next presenter? I want to be respectful of y'all's time. So I can talk forever, or I can pause here.
Thank you, Ian.
Why don't you tell us what you think the Congress is going to look like?
Okay. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting year. There's a lot of changes coming. So we do have obviously a new administration, President-elect Biden, Vice President-elect Harris. They are, you know, set to be inaugurated on the 20th. Some of the likely cabinet nominees that we're looking at, there are a couple familiar faces. Secretary of Ag, Tom Vilsack. He was Secretary of Ag during the Obama administration, so pretty well-known entity. You know, his track record with agriculture, I think, was pretty solid. So I think he's a good nominee for that position. A greater unknown is the Secretary of Interior. That is Deb Haaland from New Mexico. And I might defer to AJ and Aaron for some of their thoughts on her, but she will be the first Native American to hold that position. She was a freshman member of Congress, is an attorney, is a tribal member, and is, I think, very interested in tribal water rights settlements. So I think that'll be a priority for the administration moving into next year. But beyond that, she's a little bit of an unknown entity nationally. Looking over at EPA, it's Michael Reagan is the most likely nominee. He currently leads the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality and has served in the EPA in a couple different administrations, both Clinton and Bush, as more of a career staff person. And then the Council on Environmental Quality, Brenda Mallory, she was general counsel to the CEQ during the Obama administration. So again, somebody that knows the role and not, you know, not an unknown entity. Those nominations are all going to have to get approved by the Senate. Right now, it does not look likely that any of them will be approved prior to the inauguration. And so it'll just take a little bit of time for them to work through the process. And during that time, you're going to have career employees staffing those divisions. At the Army Corps of Engineers, we haven't really heard any rumors as far as who'll be the Assistant Secretary for Civil Works. We work with Steve Stockton, who's former Chief of Civil Works over there. And he said usually it takes about a year for that person to get confirmed, but we're going to continue watching that pretty close.
Hey, Ian.
Yes, sir.
It's John Woodling. Any names you're hearing, or is it too premature, or any names you're going to pursue for Reclamation Commissioner?
A great question, John. The one name that has come up a couple different times is Tanya Trujillo. She is part of the Biden transition at Interior, and somebody that former Senate Energy Committee staffer for Senator Bingaman from New Mexico. She knows the Colorado River Basin very well. I know that you folks in California have worked with her when she was part of the Colorado River Commission. And I know that AJ or Aaron, you're actually on the New Mexico Commission with her. Is that right? So like you guys in New Mexico probably know her pretty well too.
I've known Tanya. She started her career off in the engineer's office, and then she was chief counsel over at the Interstate Stream Commission, and then she was on the BOR under the Obama, during the Obama administration, I think, in his first term, and that's when she went from there to the Colorado River Commission, and then held a couple of other positions. I think she was up in Washington State for a while, but she is a political creature and understands that political environment very well. Plus, she's very, very smart. And the other one I heard, and I think you may have mentioned, is Estevan. He's out there, but of course he's also an expert witness for New Mexico and Texas v. New Mexico, and has testified, given his deposition. And so, if Estevan were to get that nod, God Almighty, welcome to America.
Yeah.
So anyway, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's good. That's good. That's good information. And the experiences I've had working with Tanya, she's been somebody you can work with. You might not always agree with her, but she'll sit down and listen to you. And she's not, she's in my interactions, she's been reasonable. So, but she's the only name other and Estevan. Those are the two that I've heard. But good question, John. So looking at the House of Representatives, Democrats will still have the majority, but you did see a bit of a shift in the number of seats that they're holding. They lost 13 seats. Right now, the split is 222 to 212, and there is still one seat in upstate New York that has not been certified. That goes to court, I think, on the 22nd. But it's not going to affect the majority one way or the other. But what is notable is that Speaker Pelosi has a smaller majority now, and there are a handful of kind of blue dog conservative Democrats. So it's still a pretty solid majority, but on controversial items, they will have to negotiate a little bit, but they still have a strong majority. They really haven't moved on legislation yet, but they have adopted their rules package. And one thing that I think is worth noting is that something that Congress refers to as pay-go, which is basically if you create a program that costs $1 million, you need to find an offset that's $1 million. It's kind of a budget control mechanism. And oftentimes that if you don't meet pay-go requirements, that defeats your bill from going forward, or it makes it a lot harder. They can waive pay-go, but it makes it much more difficult. For this Congress, their rules package, they actually adopted a modification to that, which essentially removes pay-go rules or waives pay-go rules for legislation that prevents, prepare for, or respond to economic, environmental, or public health consequences resulting from climate change. So, you know, that's probably going to aid in their work to move a climate change package. But I think for the purposes of water users and water managers, I think you could make the case that that definition, you know, could apply to a lot of different infrastructure proposals. I mean, a reservoir is a you know, climate change preparedness activity. Groundwater recharge, I think, is a climate change preparedness activity, because if you have climate change, you're going to need different water resources and more storage based on changing kind of weather patterns. So I think that's a very interesting thing that we're going to be watching very closely. You still have to deal with those pay provisions, at least as of right now in the Senate, but it is an interesting development. And then the other item is there has been a lot of discussion, and there was a lot of discussion last Congress as well, but in moving an infrastructure package as an economic stimulus provision. And we kind of touched on that with the letter earlier. So we're going to be watching that very closely. The thing that is also kind of interesting to watch is you have a lot of new faces leading committees in the House, and probably most notable is the House Ag Committee. You have totally new leadership there. Congressman Peterson out of Minnesota lost his race. So Congressman Scott from Georgia is going to be the new chairman. Mike Conaway of Texas was retiring, so that was not a surprise. And G.T. Thompson of Pennsylvania will be taking up the top Republican job on the Ag Committee. You'll also have new senior officials on the House Resources Committee and the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Rob Bishop of Utah retired. Congressman Bruce Westerman of Arkansas is taking up the reins there for the Republicans. Greg Walden of Oregon retired, and Kathy McMorris Rogers from Washington State is now picking up that role. On the House Appropriations Committee, which is one of the most powerful committees in Congress, Nita Lowey retired and has been replaced by Rosa DeLaura from Connecticut. And your screen color is accurate. She occasionally dyes her hair kind of fun colors. So in this one, she's got purple hair. But she's a very serious, very intelligent individual, and will be formidable there. The last couple of years, we've been pretty fortunate in getting strong funding for water infrastructure out of the Appropriations Committee, and we're going to continue that effort and hopefully see similar success this year. Senate, obviously, a lot of things changed just in the last 2 weeks over in the Senate. We have the two special elections in Georgia. Both went for the Democrats, which we've got 50 Republicans, 48 Democrats, and then 2 independents, which largely caucus with Democrats. So that gives you basically a 50-50 split. And the tiebreaker goes to the vice president. So once Georgia certifies its election results, which will happen on the 20th, will happen by or before the 22nd, the vice president will have that tie break. And so, what 50-50 looks like is, Republicans have the majority until the inauguration, and then Democrats will have the majority moving forward for the remainder of the Congress, unless somebody switches parties. And somebody asked me if at our conference earlier this week, if there was a chance that anybody would switch parties. And at this point, I don't think so, but that could change as the year goes on. I don't think you'll see somebody like Joe Manchin, who's a Democrat, conservative Democrat from West Virginia, switching to the Republican Party. He's probably one of the most conservative members of the Democratic caucus, but he's got really everything he wants. He's got a committee chairmanship, and he can be pretty effective there. And they seem to allow him the opportunity to kind of vote his state. So we've had a 50-50 Senate 3 times before in the history of the U.S. In 1881, which was actually interesting, you had 9 different members of Congress. I'm a little bit of a history nerd, so I'll try to not drag this on too much. But in that session of Congress, you had 9 different members of Congress pass, or 9 different members of the Senate pass away. And so you had the majority actually flipping a couple different times. And at one point you had a shared majority, or 50-50 split. In 1954, there was a 50-50 split following the death of a senator. And then most recently in 2001, the Senate split 50-50 from January until June, when Jim Jeffords switched parties from Republican to Democrat. There's no real requirement that they share power, but the Senate is a much each individual senator has a great deal of power. So if you're going to try to move things along quickly, you need to have some kind of an agreement just procedurally to get things done. So it's expected that they're going to follow something similar to what was done in 2001, where they have a power sharing agreement where each party gets equal appointees on the committees, with Democrats serving as the chair. Some of the key votes that you can pass with 51 right now is you can move a judicial or cabinet nomination forward. So, the Supreme Court right now, Justice Breyer is the oldest justice at 82. As far as I know, his health is good, but there have been some Democrats that are encouraging him to retire so that they can get somebody younger in there. But other than that, I don't see a Supreme Court nomination coming up, at least in the next 2 years, without something unforeseen happening. And that would just be replacing a Democrat for a Democrat. You can also use the Budget Reconciliation Act, which allows you to address things that might not be specifically related to funding with a budget motion. So it's a procedural tool that basically gives them a little bit more power. I do think that moderates like Senators Manchin, who I mentioned, Sinema, Collins, Murkowski, and Romney will have increased sway, because really neither party can afford to lose a vote on most items. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out in the next couple years. There's a couple of committee changes in the Senate as well. Senator John Barrasso from Wyoming is leaving the EPW committee and heading over to the Senate Energy Committee, which has jurisdiction over Bureau of Reclamation. Debbie Stabenow will now be the Agriculture Committee Chairwoman. She's been a senior Democrat there for quite some time, but will be now operating as chair. And then Lisa Murkowski, she is stepping down from the Senate Energy Committee. She's term limited out, but she's going to stay senior on the Appropriations Committee. And that's really kind of what I wanted to cover. Again, as I mentioned at the top, thank you guys for the partnership with NWRA. I enjoy this organization. I enjoy getting to talk with all of you. And as I think Aaron mentioned, man, I miss doing it in person, because, over a computer is better than nothing. But, most of the good conversations happen after the session with a cold drink in your hand. So look forward to a time when we can do that again, and happy to take any questions that folks have.
Good.
Ian, this is Mark. I just wanted to make a point that I think came up in some discussion dealing with the letter that you started out in your presentation, and recognizing that the Groundwater Caucus, or the GMDA, is a collection of districts that span not only the West but also the South. And so as we collaborate and work with NWRA, we're also mindful and looking for those opportunities, kind of like we talked about in the NWRA initiative for visioning the future of NWRA as a truly national organization. We certainly want to look for opportunities to bring in, without leaving the traditional perspectives of NWRA and reclamation states, expanding the opportunity to bring in the South and possibly even Florida, particularly as we talk about groundwater issues. So any opportunity to frame groundwater issues to include those issues and needs of Louisiana and Mississippi, we'd like to be mindful of that, I think. If you want to make any comments on that.
Oh, yeah, Mark, I think absolutely 100% agree with you. And with this letter that we just did, it was kind of a coalition letter. So NWRA wasn't the only ones kind of driving it, and it had come from some other groups that we work with that are just Western. So I think that's why it had that Western focus. That said, we definitely want to do more to highlight the role of water managers in the Southeast. And we'll be looking for some opportunities to do that, because even though there are regional differences in geology, geography, and hydrology, the central issues are exactly the same. We've all got these infrastructure funding needs, these water quality issues that we're trying to deal with, and now throw COVID on top of that. So we definitely want to do that, and I welcome the participation of every GMDA member in NWRA, and want to make sure that we're addressing the issues that are important to all of you in the Southeast as well. So.
Thank you, Ian.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll move on to committee reports. National Water Resource Association, groundwater and federal issues.
Mark, do you want to handle that, or you, me, and Ian?
Yeah, I think you're right. Just a collective response.
At least from my standpoint, you've heard my spiel about stuff. I mean, there's still stuff out there to think about and talk about. There's the Maui case that's still out there pending, and we discussed that earlier about actually in the week, I think. Well, actually last week, I guess, during federal affairs, about where we're headed. That's an appellate issue. I don't know what is going to come with, of course, the groundwater on our side in New Mexico, and I think elsewhere. But at least from federal affairs, and jump in, Mark and/or Ian, if I miss a point. Part of where we're missing a lot of things, and of course I miss talking to John Woodling and to Jim. I mean, the old original task force, groundwater task force to NWRA, we would have a couple of meetings a year where we'd fly into Dallas or elsewhere. We'd meet at the NWRA conferences, and and there's my friend from Texas sitting there looking at his cell phone, and but no, I mean, it's difficult in this setting to try to discuss where we are with NWRA, or well, at least in my perspective, where we are with our group, because we don't have that in-person ability to deal with things. And when we were being able to get together in person, we were then exchanging emails and talking about issues that are coming up. At one point, I was fairly talkative, at least email, and sending out to our group and to Ian and other members of NWRA, the task force, and GMDA. But this doggone COVID has gotten in the way of this interpersonal relationships, so it's difficult, at least from my perspective, to give a report. Committee report on the NWRA caucus, GMDA caucus, because we didn't have a hell of a lot of things to talk about. I mean, it's there, but it's kind of a collective now. It's not just a caucus discussion, because we're all talking about the same thing, being locked down, COVID, and how we're not able to operate. And I guess the other question is, what's the new norm? So with that, I just don't have anything more to add. Ian and Mark, I'll kick it over to you to see if you have anything to add to that.
Well, I'll just say to add, AJ, that remember, board, that you've got sort of 4 guys identified to make sure we're represented at the NWRA board table, first of all, and then also in the caucuses that are associated with the NWRA meetings. And that's us, that's you. So how to best utilize particularly that hour or so, like Ian described earlier, they've planned a caucus time, groundwater caucus time for February 12th, which is the last day that NWRA has planned to collaborate on this leadership conference. And so we have that to look forward to. And I'm not sure if Ian has a concept of maybe how that would come down, but very often, like the last one we had, we try to get some reports and just touch base. As AJ pointed out, it's tough to do when you're not doing it in person. But yet this Hollywood Squares format really provides some opportunity for some quick communicating and face to face. And I think we at minimum have to keep doing that as we move forward with our current setting. So Ian, I don't know if you have any other comments, but.
Well, Mark, I think you and AJ, hit it on the head. I think that there's an opportunity for us to kind of connect again on the 12th. And, the format for that session, I'd be open to structuring it however works best for the members. Whatever you guys want to do, we'll do it. If you want to have a speaker, we can do that. Or if you kind of sit down and have, kind of a strategy session on groundwater legislation, there might be an opportunity to put some thoughts down on paper and get some ideas as what we want to do moving forward. So we can connect and maybe get an email chain going or something like that and figure out what would be the best service we can provide to GMDA in that format. And we'll do whatever you guys want.
With all due respect, and I agree, but back to this discussion, I have to tell everyone I have to leave in about 3 minutes. I have a 4 o'clock obligation. But these things are great. This video thing, this new life that we lead, but it makes it so easy to be distracted because I can put the voice on mute and I can turn the camera off and be distracted and deal with other things. When I'm sitting in a room with you folks, we can visit with each other, but I just don't ignore. I say ignore. I don't let as much go over my head or past me as it's so easy to do in these conferences. I just finished a 2-week hearing with 7 attorneys involved over water rights and water claimants. Aaron alluded to it earlier in his presentation. We discovered that a good part of the transcript, because it was supposed to be recorded. The recording was bad in parts, so we've lost a lot of the what we call a record proper. And so we're trying to figure out what to do over 30,000 acre feet of water annually that's trying to be diverted, and over 19,000 acre feet consumptive. And so what I guess the point I'm making in these video conferences that we're doing, if I have any advice, is let's keep them short and focused. If by doing so, I think maybe we can be more successful in addressing the points or the issues that we need to talk about. And then we can go on our merry way. So instead of an hour, maybe a 20-minute or 30-minute discussion, in my opinion, serves us best. So I say God bless to everybody. Be safe. And I'll talk to you all in person one day soon.
Thanks, AJ.
Thank you. We'll move on to Water Committee. Aaron or Dick?
Aaron?
Are we supposed to do this and yell not it?
Go ahead.
I got in first, man.
Madam Chair, I as I alluded to earlier, I certainly haven't done any justice by this committee and dedicated the requisite time commitment that I thought I would be able to, but I will offer to double my efforts going forward if that satisfies the chair.
Thank you.
So that would be double of zero?
I gave 1%.
Okay, good. All right, good.
Thank you. Membership committee, Steve?
The membership committee hasn't met, so we don't have anything to report. We will work harder in the next few months to actually do something.
Thank you.
We're going to blame COVID this time. That concludes my report. If any of the other membership committee wants to speak up, go right ahead.
Hey, Steve, this is John Woodling. I think it'd be worthwhile. We have an Aqua Groundwater Committee meeting coming up in February. And the last one we had remote, it was probably 70, 80 people, many of which were local groundwater agencies. And I think a presentation on GMDA and both its role in the NWRA, I think, which is relevant to California, but also some of the things people are doing, and especially, we have a lot of ag districts who aren't as sophisticated as a lot of the urban groundwater agencies in California, and I think have things to learn from some of you. The presentation on the AEM was a good example today, and how far you've taken that. So why don't we talk, and once I get a date for that, think about, even if it's just a brief presentation, because there's got to be a few members that could be picked up in California.
If the next president actually puts me on this committee, I think what we'll do is in the next week or 2 weeks, we will have a membership committee meeting with you, John, and whoever else is assigned to the committee.
Yeah, and I'll double my 0% commitment from the last term as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. A website, Kristen?
Well, the website is up. There's just not much on it. And I have to say that the committee of myself has not put much effort into it. So I'm joining the ranks.
Thank you. Awards, Tony?
Tony had to leave.
Okay. Consider policy priority recommendations for NWRA Leadership Forum. Who's taking that?
Madam Chair, I don't believe we have any new policy recommendations. It's the same recommendations we've already stated in the previous meetings, unless there's something other than the NWRA committee, caucus committee has something extra to add.
Okay. All right, next we're going to do the directors change. Kristen, do you want me to just list them off and you'll write them down?
Yes, that's fine.
All right, Colorado. Everett, are you going to move to third year and the other two stay, or what's Colorado doing?
Directors. Sorry, Madam President. I heard Colorado was in the other room.
Everett, are you moving to third year, to the 3 year?
Everett had to step out, Linda, I'm sorry. And then I had to step out and I just walked back in the room.
Okay.
Everett will slide down the list.
He will go to third, okay. And then Randy, you're gonna stay as the advisor?
Yes, ma'am.
And Don will move to second? Or, yeah, second, and Jim will be first? Is that right?
So. Yeah, Don's shaking his head and smiling.
All right, Kansas.
Thank you.
Yes, Kansas.
This is Tim. Mark, do you have anything to suggest or Orrin on our directors or Jason?
Mark had to step out. I think I'm the one that's up, so it's up to you. I can slide down, or Shannon wants to try to get in.
But I think that's the discussion. If Shannon would want to, or if you want to rotate back to the 3-year, Jason, I guess that's really the discussion you guys can have.
And
Madam
Shannon
Chair?
dropped off, so I don't know.
Madam Chair, this is Aaron. I would like to make a suggestion if it would be appropriate.
Yes.
It occurs to me that this is something that we could probably more efficiently handle via email, and each state address the question with their own state caucus there and send an email back to Kristen. And as she has at her disposal that list of members, she might send out an email so that everybody can just hit reply and designate their state in the positions. That would be my recommendation, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Kristen, does that work for you?
Yes, I'll send out an email, and if we can have everyone respond to it within a few days, that would be great.
Okay.
I think that's an excellent idea, since not everybody's on the meeting here. So I would agree. For
Okay.
Kansas.
At this
Sounded
point,
like a very, that sounded like a very presidential idea, Aaron.
Haven't seen the problem with that, Aaron, is now I can't nominate somebody who's not here. So
Sure you can. You're not obligated to tell them. You just send the email and there you go.
yeah,
Bob.
but it would have been so much better of a surprise, you know.
okay, we'll move on to changing of the president and election of officers. Aaron moves up to president. We need to have nominations for a vice president.
I nominate Steve Walthour.
Okay, are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? All right,
Move nominations cease.
they did. Steve Walther will be the president. All in favor? No. All against? Nay. Congratulations, Steve.
Thank you.
Secretary Treasurer. Steve had talked to me earlier that he's been Secretary Treasurer for 5 years, and now that he is Vice President, that opens up the Secretary Treasurer position. In the bylaws, we couldn't find anything that said it had to be a joint effort. We could split that apart. And at this time, I would like your thoughts on that. Separating the treasurer from the secretary.
First of all, whoever decides to do the job, or two people doing the job, we're committed here to make that transition pretty simple. Our staff is going to digitize the files that we have, so we will not be toting around filing cabinets in the future, just to let you know.
Okay. Do I have any nominations for secretary?
Madam Chair, this is Aaron. Maybe a better way to phrase that would be to solicit a volunteer for that, because I think everybody feels a little awkward about nominating somebody, recognizing that is a position that really, even if we do split it, the treasurer position, certainly coupled with the secretary treasurer position, is not one that can be effectively filled just by an individual that doesn't have somebody helping them. I am duly impressed on the job that has been done. Steve has done an excellent job, and I certainly recognize that he has some excellent staff there that is taking care of business there and making him look good. And that's the kind of situation that's going to be needed to continue with the excellent job that's been done. So that would be my recommendation, is to ask the members here to make a pretty serious commitment and volunteer, recognizing that we're probably going to need somebody that has some support staff to be able to make that work.
Do I have any volunteers for secretary? Okay,
I'm looking at you, Kansas, maybe Nebraska.
Nebraska has some other things going.
Well, we've narrowed it down to Kansas then.
Somebody? Well, I know that Kristen will finish and Steve will finish out until our next meeting. I'm going to move ahead to the treasurer. I do have someone to nominate for treasurer, Dick Ehrman. I've talked to Dick and he has agreed to run for this with help from Kristen and Steve getting started. Am I correct, Dick?
Linda called me yesterday and broached this question. My first reaction is, are you nuts? You know, I'm a geologist, I'm not an accountant. And so at first I kind of politely said, nah, I don't think so. But then we got to talking about it, and I don't think it's probably going to be, you know, running the national mint or anything like that. So yeah, as long as there's some support from somebody who has, you know, some accounting skills and background, I consider it a major victory if I can balance my checkbook. So, you know, as long as somebody's willing to give me a little bit of support in that, I can probably do it for a few years. So now that I've just given you the worst campaign speech in the entire history of the known universe, I'll let you guys decide what you want to do.
Move nominations cease.
Second.
All right, nominations have ceased. Dick Irwin is nominated for treasurer.
Hey, Linda, I guess that just kind of brings up a procedural thing. Do we need to actually take any official action to split those two offices up?
Well, Dick, I think it'd be really good if you just take both and leave it the way it is.
Now, wait a minute, that ain't the thing that was pitched at me, CEs.
Actually, Dick, if you'll take it over, we will help you a lot.
Yeah.
Do both of them.
You know, I think it's not a bad idea to consider splitting them up, you know, in the future. For the interim, yeah, between Steve and Kristen, I think, you know, I can probably handle both of them. But I would say that perhaps at our next meeting, maybe we might want to draft some amendments to the Constitution to actually make it into 4 officers. That would be my suggestion based on the conversations we've had so far.
Move that the nominations for Secretary Treasurer cease.
This is Don Christie. I move that Dick be elected by acclamation.
Second.
Wow.
Second.
Thank you.
My mom said I'd never amount to anything.
You know,
Dick, just to let you know, I took it over until they could find somebody. That person's
And that-
no longer in GMDA, the president, and that was 10
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. No, I know how those things go, Steve. So, well, like I say, I twisted Tyler's arm. He said he could be my advisor on the thing, you know, so.
I did say
I'll
I'd
get
help
some
Dick
help.
where I could.
Yeah, Madam President, I just want to make a comment too, that Dick inspires me significantly. And I am a geologist. I am not a secretary either. But as Dick works on that with collaborating with Steve Welltower and staff, with Kristen, I think we could think in terms of looking down the road when that amendment happens, to take part of that, take that secretary position off of Dick. But I think you've got a great direction transition right now. So I'll get that comment.
Thank you.
We're going to hold you to that, Mark.
Okay, Dick. Geologist to geologist.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to nominate Dick as secretary treasurer. All those opposed, nay.
Nay. Oh, no, wait, sorry.
Congratulations, Dick. All right, moving on. We have consideration for committee appointments, and I'm going to leave that to Aaron for our next meeting. He can make those assignments. And the GMDA meeting and summer conference, we have a Zoom meeting in April. And as far as the summer conference, what are people's ideas on that?
Madam Chair, North Plains will host the Zoom meeting in April for you.
Thank you. Except it will be Aaron.
Madam Chair, I think as far as our summer conference and probably, well, I'll say just stick with the summer conference. I think that's something that we need to discuss in April just to see how things are shaking out. I have no ability to predict how this is going to go. So hopefully by then we'll see things opening back up and we'll see a window of opportunity to meet there. But I think that'd probably be best addressed at the next virtual meeting.
Thank you. And the annual conference in 2022. That means, Steve, you host.
Yeah, we'll host a meeting. We haven't picked a site yet. I anticipate that we'll be back in meeting in person by then. Either COVID will be gone or all of us will have our vaccinations by that time. And we will figure that out in January of 2022.
Okay. Do I have any other business?
Yes. Usually, because of this, our diminished capacity through this Zoom, I wanted to, but we want to not forget this. As Linda, you've been really a fine president through these COVID issues. You will be receiving, if you haven't already received, a plaque from the organization that you'll be getting as appreciation for your leadership as president. Tony would have been making this award if he'd have been on at this time. And at this point, I would recommend we all give you a round of applause.
Thank you, Steve. And I did get the plaque, and it is a beautiful plaque. I'll show it to you here in just a second. How do I show him?
You gotta hit your video.
There. Can you see it? Oh, nope.
It's transparent.
Yeah.
You can't see it.
You can see right through it.
It's a water drop.
Cool.
It's a water drop. It's really nice. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for all your work, Linda.
Thank you.
We do appreciate all you've done for us. And I
Well,
also just, Madam Chair, while we're handing out kudos here. I think it bears repeating that Kristen has been a rock star astronaut through all of this, and I certainly appreciate the effort that she puts into keeping the wheels turning here for us.
I do too. She has been a good part of the last few years of GMDA, and I'm very pleased that I've gotten to work with her.
Thank you very much, all of you. And it's been a pleasure working with all of you.
So if there's no other business, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. You guys be safe.
Yep.